Welcome to Australian Survivor Archives, the only podcast going over the complete history of Australian Survivor from Whalers Way right through to the current day. When I say at the beginning of these, I'm excited for today's episode, let's be honest, I lie half the time. I don't give a shit about the other 53 episodes we've done. They're all crap, they're all boring, no one wants to listen to them. You wanted to get to this episode. This is the one you've all been waiting for. We are so excited to not only get back to interviews, but today's interview, it's a big one and one that you are not going to want to miss. I'm going to start off by saying that my name is Ben, and I wish I had brought a zesty salad tonight.
Hey, Ben. Hey, listeners. Let's just say this. It's an absolute pleasure to be here tonight for this interview. Now, you're right, Ben. We've had some big interviews since starting ASA, but this would have to be the most anticipated interview we've ever done. Like, this is something 2 years in the making, probably even longer for you. I know you've been talking to this contestant over the years about possibly getting an interview with him, and today we've got it. Now, there's a reason why I've got Sir Donald Bradman in the background for the people here listening, watching this podcast on YouTube. This is Sir Donald Bradman, one of the greatest cricketers of all time. Here today, we're to interview one of the greatest Australian Survivor players of all time. Now, Ben, I would normally introduce the person that we're interviewing, but I'm a professional and you really wanted to do this. So I didn't want to have an argument here on ASA, so I'm allowing you, as much as I wanted to do this, I'm allowing you the honours.
Allowing me? Wow. Thank you for that, Matt. I didn't know that's how it worked, but okay, we'll take that. Yes, no, I needed to be sure that we can properly introduce our guest today, because he has been referred to as the Master Tactician, the Lord Mayor of the Jungle, the Puppet Master, the Master Chef, and the seventh wonder of the ancient world. He has had the most episodes named after him on this very podcast. He has appeared on numerous other reality shows, but did not leave a legacy and impact on any of those compared to what he did on season 2 of Australian Survivor. It is a massive, massive honour to welcome to Australian Survivor Archives, the one, the only, Mr. David Oldfield. David, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Well, thank you to both of you for that extraordinary prelude to my simple presence here this evening. I really don't know what to say except, well, thank you. I had no idea that you guys were so enthralled, particularly with our series, but even in that sense, just with my involvement and contribution. Thank you.
David, is Survivor something that you talk about very often, or is this a bit of a rare experience that you get to go back after all these years and talk about your days out in Vanuatu?
It's actually pretty rare because, as you know, and this particular Survivor was 15 years ago, and I have done a lot of shows since, and I've done a lot of, I had my own radio show for 5 years, so I've done a lot of media since, and the fact that I did Survivor seems to have fallen into the background in many respects to a degree that people often say, oh, hang on, you did Survivor, didn't you? It's not in the forefront of their mind as to the things that I've done, which in many respects is a shame for me, because of all the things that I've done from a reality television point of view, it is the thing which is foremost in my mind. I mean, it's the show that I enjoyed the most. It's the only show that I would say, hey, I'd really think about doing that again. If they'd told me that it was going to back up and we're going to go straight back into the jungle the day it finished, I would have done that. I loved doing it. And I didn't really know anything about it when I was first asked to do the program. And so, in fact, they originally approached me saying that it was the mole that we were going to be doing. I guess they just didn't want to give away what it was. And so it's an unfortunate thing that many people don't immediately associate me as having done the program, because it's the program I most associate myself with having done, because it's the one I enjoyed the most.
It's fascinating because we've found that from several of the guests we've had on the show this season, that's a similar page. I mean, when we spoke to Amber, she sort of had blocked it out and everything, but we got her on another one of our shows a couple of years ago, and she had just written a column about the fact of, hey, remember I was on Survivor at one point, and then speaking to someone like Kim Johnson, who kind of forms a very small part of her career. Wayne Gardner, I think we're the only podcast in the history of podcasts to not speak to him about his Grand Prix career. So it's interesting because we're obviously
Grand Prix. Wayne Gardner, what did you do?
yeah, something like that. But it's fascinating.
I was a racing car driver, wasn't he?
No, the Bikes Grand Prix, same thing. Come on, But it's fascinating because, yeah, it's a season that we've enjoyed covering. One that we've thoroughly enjoyed talking about you and the entire cast. And it's one thing that we are really trying to, I guess, achieve with covering the older seasons is to bring them back out into the public, bring them back out and say, let's just not ignore them, because I'm just going to say this right now, David. We said this at the end of last episode that, if you were to look at some of the greatest players in the history of Australian Survivor, your name should be up there and it should never be ignored like your season and the season that preceded yours on Channel 9 should be. It's a travesty that Australian Survivor fans forget how well you and many other players from the first two seasons played the game.
Oh, thank you.
Now, David, before we actually start getting into talking about your time in Vanuatu, I guess for the listeners that might not be too familiar with you or familiar with what you did prior to, I guess, being on reality TV, can you just give us a bit of a rundown, I guess, of what made you a celebrity? How did you get to the point of being on a celebrity version of Survivor?
Yeah, well, look, it's fair to say I've never and still don't consider myself a celebrity. Like Matt Damon is a celebrity. Brad Pitt is a celebrity. George Clooney are celebrities. Sadly, Sean Connery was a celebrity. What a great celebrity he was, and a wonderful actor. So I've never seen myself as a celebrity. I've always seen myself as a person who was in the public eye. So I'm not really comfortable with the attachment. Not that I'm concerned with you guys referring to me that way, but I'm not actually comfortable with the attachment of the moniker of celebrity. I suppose in the sense of why was I in the public eye, I was the spin doctor of my generation, if I put it that way, which was in the late 90s, and that led me into a propagandist. I was the propagandist of my time, and that led me into a career ultimately to being a parliamentarian and being an elected member of parliament. And so I had some level of notoriety and public attention, and I was really quite publicly well known. Funnily enough, I was probably better known as a spin doctor in the late 90s than I was as a parliamentarian in the sort of early part of the 2000s, strangely enough. But yeah, that was it. So that was what made me publicly known, brought me to an attention factor that caused them to ask me to be on the program.
So when they do ask you to be on the program, you mentioned before that you initially were sort of advertised to it as being the mole. What point did they then say, no, actually, this is Survivor? And did that sort of make you more interested? I mean, kind of when they're approaching you, sort of what was it that kind of whetted your appetite and then eventually made you say yes to doing it?
Well, look, I know it's kind of sacrilege for me to put it this way, but the fact is that I didn't really ever watch any of these shows. So I was aware the mole existed, and I knew that I can't even think of the lady who was the mole, whatever. The lady who was actually the presenter. I think she used to be one of she was like the matron on the Young Doctors or something or other, was how I had some recollection of her. And I could even have that wrong. So I just remember fleetingly seeing ads for the mole. Survivor, I'd never actually seen Survivor. I was obviously aware of Survivor, but these were not really shows that I watched. Sorry about that. They were not really shows that I watched. So I wasn't familiar with how any of it was played or how any of it operated. I'd probably seen an hour in snippets of different Survivor shows at different times when I might have been flicking channels and all that sort of thing. So a lot of it didn't mean a great deal to me, apart from being aware that the shows existed, apart from being aware that Survivor was extraordinarily popular and looked like fun. And I must kind of put it this way, because this is the way it actually is. It wasn't that I'm not interested in these shows. I'm not interested in watching as such. I've never been a watcher. I've never been an observer. I've always been a participant. And to this day, I can't be bothered watching sport or anything like I played rugby union. I won national titles in sport, but I've always been a participant. I've never been much for watching. That changes these days because I love nothing more than watching my own young kids run around at rugby, and I'm yelling and screaming on the sidelines like I never ever thought I would as a spectator. So the shows are marvellous. Survivor is just such an extraordinary show. It really is. But it's certainly a lot more fun being involved than it is watching. What happened when they came to me and they told me it was the mole? It was obviously a cover in the first instance. I don't recollect exactly how long it was between when they first made contact to when they ultimately told me it was Survivor, and I'm not sure what the time frame for them was on that, but I suppose it was not more than a matter of a couple of weeks.
So was this your first reality show after giving up politics?
I was actually still a member of Parliament at the time. So it was my first reality show, and I was still a member of Parliament at the time when I did it. So
how does that work then when you are a member of Parliament to then going off and doing a reality show? I can't imagine that some of your constituents and other people around that would be too happy that you're off to go and film a reality show rather than do the job they elected you for.
Well, we're allowed holidays. In fact, most people would say that parliamentarians are on holiday all the time. So, it was 4 weeks in the jungle. I mean, school teachers get 12 weeks a year. Yeah. So, police officers probably get 6, do you?
Yeah, 6, we do.
So, it was 3 or 4 weeks away. There was no reason to think terribly much of it particularly.
Were you worried, this being your first reality show and you're still in politics?
Keep in mind the Parliament doesn't sit all the time. The Parliament has whole months where they don't actually sit. So then it's just a matter of office work in between. Sorry, go ahead.
Were you worried at the time that going on a reality show, especially, with your background, like obviously you were in the headlines a lot with One Nation and Pauline Hanson and everything like that, were you worried that they might try to exploit that with the editing and stuff? Was there ever that concern about this being your first reality show?
There's a blend of answers for that. The first thing is my naivety and my own comfort with regards to what I'm going to do and say. I was quite comfortable that I wouldn't do or say anything that would cause an issue because I'm relatively controlled in the way I approach things. By the same token, I was also naive in the sense as to how these things are done because I'd never done reality. I'd done lots of TV, and I'd done very extensive interviews with 60 Minutes and A Current Affair and every conceivable current affair show on every channel, and so I'd done lots and lots of television, but always in political interviews. So I've always been comfortable when it comes to being asked questions or answering questions and being on camera. So I was never concerned about how I might be portrayed. That changed over the years, and I wasn't concerned about how I was portrayed in Survivor. But over the years, of course, reality TV, I don't think Survivor has gone this way, but all other reality TV is now producer-driven, it's not reality at all. It's a bunch of people being set up to do a whole range of things that are fake and are scripted. But the Survivor we did wasn't like that. It was pretty real. And you got from the people pretty much what they were there to give of themselves. Whereas, I mean, in recent things that I've done in reality TV, you would have producers whispering things to you, and there'd be microphones there'd be speakers where you'd be able to hear them quietly telling, go over to so and so and say this to so, and you're like, you play ball with it all, but it's not reality TV.
Ben and I have said it numerous times throughout covering the season that it's a credit to David Mason, the executive producer of Celebrity Survivor and the editors that, they didn't take that, I guess what you call the dirty path of trying to edit you to look like this bad guy. I think obviously you were a great player of the game, and instead of them trying to make you someone you're not, they actually showed you for you of being this great player. And I think if you're playing Survivor these days, when they pick cast members, they're looking at how they can, for the audience, they're looking at how they can portray you and how they can edit you and all that. And they have different types of characters they want, where they could have done that to you, Survivor, they could have, but they actually didn't do that. And you left the show. I guess anyone that would have watched it, if they had, they might have gone into that show, maybe if they had different political views, they might have thought, David Oldfield, I don't like him. But I think by the end of the show, they would have said, hey, this guy's actually a pretty good guy. Like, you came across very, very well. And that was a credit to, I guess, the editors and David Mason that they actually showed you for who you really are.
I thought the whole crew generally, the various producers that we had and David Mason, I thought they did a terrific job. Right across the board. You pretty much saw what was me, and there was there wasn't any setting people up to be particular villains or anything like that, which is something that I've been exposed to consistently ever since then in the later reality shows. In some cases, you get picked, as you're saying, particularly because, okay, who are we going to have for a villain? Let's get David Oldfield. He's the villain from Wardrobe. Absolutely, let's get him. So Survivor wasn't like that at all. I think also there was an element of, I was a bit surprising to them as well. I'm not sure that I was quite what they were expecting. I mean, in a positive sense. I'm not really sure what they were expecting, but I wasn't, I think, who they thought I was. So it kind of went from there.
We know that each of the contestants were playing for a charity, and you obviously all each paid a fee to playing the game. Now, we're asking this to each of the contestants, and Dave, you don't have to answer it, of course, if you don't want to. But do you remember what your fee was that you were paid for playing?
I remember exactly what it was, and from conversations that we've had off camera, I gather that my fee was multiply quite a lot larger than some of the others, in some cases 3 times as much. So it's probably best if I don't pin down the precise amount, but I thought I was quite reasonably well paid at the time, and it was, frankly, on a par with what I was paid even 10 years later. So it was, really quite good for the day. And I was surprised to find out that some of the others, I just thought we were all being paid the same. I don't remember actually ever discussing with anybody during the program as to who was getting paid what. I just presumed we all got the same.
Right, so there's been a little bit of confusion throughout the season, and I think obviously it's 15 years ago. People have been, a lot of these cast members of this season have been on a lot of TV shows since. Now, some are saying that it didn't matter where you placed; you already had the same amount, the same figure that you signed on. Your agent had obviously said, "Yep, this is what they're going to pay you. Doesn't matter if you go out on day 3 or win it." Is that how you remember it, or the longer you lasted in the show, would that mean your money would increase?
Yeah, that's how it was for me. There was if I recollect, there was a set figure that you were going to get regardless of how long you were there, but then a point cut in where if you were still there, you were getting so many thousands of dollars a day. Yeah. And so it kept going from there. So no, my figures continue to accumulate with length of time on camera.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense because I said this to Kim Johnson. Obviously, she was first out, so she lasted 2 days or 3 days, but hers was one of the lower figures. But I said to her, well, what's the incentive to stay in? If you're going to get the same amount of lasting 3 days or 25 days, you may as well be like her and want to leave after 3 days if you're not really enjoying it and go home. You're still going to make the same amount of money. So what you're saying definitely makes sense, that it gives some incentive to these celebrities, especially someone like Gabby, who clearly throughout the whole season said she didn't want to be there. But if it means lasting a couple more days is going to put an extra few $1,000s each day in your pocket, well, it gives you something to want to go on to the next day.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I don't remember what it was, but it was something like $10,000 or $20,000 was the guaranteed figure. And then, as I say, there was so many $1,000s a day after that added up to being quite, very reasonable after a couple of weeks.
And were you told if you win it, were you told before the show started, if you win this show, you're going to make this amount of money? Yeah,
there was another $100,000 for the winner.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And the charity, of course.
Yeah, the charity got $100,000. So the charity got $5,000. If you weren't a winner, your charity got $5,000. If you were the winner, you got $100,000 for your charity. Plus, you got your pay along the line. Plus, you got an extra $100,000 for winning. With
your charity, just while we're on the topic of this, we usually sort of ask this towards more the end, but we're on the topic. But now you chose the Legacy Foundation for it. What was the reason? Legacy, had you had much association with them over the years, and that's why you eventually chose them?
I had done a little bit of fundraising for them in my own right, just as sort of small things in the past at Parliament House and luncheons and things like that. And my whole family were in the military, always in wars. We were never civilian soldiers, but I'm the only male, going back, that didn't fight in a war. In my family, my brother was in Vietnam. My grandfather was in World War I. My father and uncle and great uncles were in World War II, all combat veterans. And so, there is an attachment for me, particularly for the military. And had things been slightly different in my life, I would have been in the military myself.
You mentioned that you had never really watched the show, bits and pieces here and there. When you realised it was Survivor, when you were getting ready to go there, was there any moment there where you try to catch up some other episodes, or did any other sort of preparation, maybe some extra physical training, work on your cooking that we'll talk about? I mean, kind of anything to prep yourself before you went out to Vanuatu?
I think I did do a little bit of exercise, but I mean, I didn't know there was a great deal of chance for me to change terribly much myself physically in the time that I had, and I wasn't all that disciplined about doing it. And I had planned on watching quite a lot of Survivor, but once again, it was just the time frame of it didn't allow it. So I think I saw 2 episodes before I went, which was enough to give me some concept of how it was played. Whereas, like Guy Leach, for example, was just such an avid Survivor fan. He'd probably seen every episode of every series and, knew it from front to back. I was completely naive where it was concerned, but I saw probably just enough to have an understanding of it before we left.
Did you know, before going into it, did you know that, like, who else was going to be in the show, or did you only find that out when you got on the plane?
Yeah, my recollection is that we didn't know at all until we got to the airport. And then not everybody who was going to be there was at the airport when I was going. I think we went, from different locations in some cases. And we may have even gone slightly different times. I don't remember. But I think on the plane I was on, there was Wayne and Guy, and there was me. And I'm not actually sure who else. There might have
been Kim. I think Kim told a story about her and Wayne having a conversation on the plane over there.
Yeah, Kim. Well, then obviously Kim, and there might have been Elton, but I'm not sure.
Did you know these people? I mean, I guess most people know the likes of a Guy Leach and a Wayne Gardner, but I mean, did you know who Kim Johnson was? Did you know who Elton was? And if so, had you dealt with any of them before, sort of through anything that you had done in politics, or met any of the contestants beforehand?
No, I very briefly met Guy. I wouldn't say that I knew him, but I very briefly met him because, we both grew up on the northern beaches in Sydney, and we both sort of lived in the Manly area. And, he had shops and things. He had his own sort of mobile phone shop at one stage there down on the beachfront. So I had bumped Guy Leach, and I was very familiar with who he was in the sense of being an Ironman and being a remarkably successful athlete. I was aware of him in that sense. I don't think I really knew anything about Wayne Gardner. I'd probably just in the news been aware that an Australian had won the World Motorcycle 500cc, I think it was, championship, and he may have won more than once, I don't know. So I'm vaguely aware that he was a world champion. I think I may have known about Kim. I think she was going out with Tom's surname.
Williams,
Tom Williams. I think she was going out with Tom Williams at the time, and I kind of knew Tom Williams just from TV bits and pieces.
That was a shirtless Dancing with the Stars around then when that went viral. Yeah.
So I was probably aware of Kim Johnson, but that was about it. No, Elton, none of the others I knew. I knew Gabrielle as the pleasure machine, because I'd seen the scenario that had taken place with I think it was Solomon Holmano.
That's how I knew. That's how I knew it, because I'm a big rugby league fan. So that's at the time. Yeah, she was. Well, she just I think finished with that Solomon Holmano. Yeah.
Imogen and I had mutual friends in Bessie Barker and Jeff Barker, or Bessie Bardot and Jeff Barker, who now live in America. So we had mutual friends, but I didn't really know Imogen. I may have bumped her somewhere down the line, but didn't really know her. I was aware of Amber. I had no knowledge of Fiona or Nicolle.
Not even Nicolle. Didn't remember from Home and Away. No, Bobby weren't a Home and Away fan growing up.
I know once again it's sacrilege, but I don't think I've ever seen a Home and Away show.
You're not missing out on much. Let's be honest.
No, I'm surprised you didn't know who Fiona was. Even I knew as a kid. I knew who Fiona. She used to do the talkback stuff with Stan Zemanek, and she was obviously a rock singer and all that. But
I've since only in recent times, like I think. I don't quite know how I've seen this, but in recent times I have seen her performing on Hey Hey It's Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
You might have seen that. I think we shared the clip of that on our
Is that
our socials. Probably.
Yeah. Sure, right. That's how I saw it. I saw it on Instagram from you guys. I couldn't quite figure out how I had seen this, but now that's right. I saw it on Instagram. But prior to that, no, I had no idea that she was a rock singer or any idea about her at all.
So you must have been totally confused then when Ben Wynn turned up in day 2, wondering who the hell this guy is.
Well, yeah, he wasn't anybody I knew. He was a nice guy, Ben, though. Yeah.
Was he? Was he really?
What's your take on Ben Wynn? Why was he there? 'Cause this is something we haven't been able to get to the bottom of. No, even David Mason couldn't. He said he thought he was someone that had applied for the Mole one time and he liked him and got him on, but we haven't been able to track him down. The guy's like a ghost. But what's your take on him? Do you reckon? Was it planned that for him to just come on and then get voted out straight away, or was that just how it worked out?
I think that's just how it worked out. I mean, he was supposed to be the survivalist who was a prize. We actually won Ben, and so he was the muscle-bound guy who was the jungle warfare expert, and you win Ben, and you win all sorts of knowledge that he has in regards to being able to take you through and find stuff that you step on that you think is weeds that are actually make a zesty salad.
Did you learn anything from it?
I've just realised where you with your zesty salad.
Because you had to keep feeding up Elton. Elton wanted his steak, so you're making up all the stews.
And he didn't give a shit about your salad.
And he never cared about the salad. You were trying to tell him about the zesty salad. He didn't care at all about the salad.
No, he's a real meat eater, the old Elton.
He loves the steak.
Did Ben Wynn, did you learn anything from him with what you can cook up?
Yeah, I liked Ben. I liked Ben. I thought he was a good guy. And, of course, the fact that he was in the military automatically made me like him because, that's the way I feel about these things. But he showed us what was wild rocket and, a range of other things that were plant-like or plant life that was edible that the rest of us wouldn't have had any idea it was anything but weeds. And I've got a feeling that it was him who showed us about getting bamboo and chopping it and making toothbrushes from sprigs of bamboo. I think he was the person who showed us how to do that to have a chance of trying to still have teeth at the end of it all. You picture we went a month without toothpaste. 3.5 weeks without toothpaste. It seems like, a big deal, but no, it is a big deal as far as your dental hygiene is concerned. And no toothbrushes, these bamboo things that we'd done with knives. So I'm pretty sure it was him who showed us that. So, no, Ben was useful. The very interesting thing that I found about Ben was that he basically was a terrible swimmer. He was extraordinarily, he was built like the proverbial, brick shithouse. But he was a dreadful swimmer. And of course, you'd have to put that down to the fact that he was so heavy. He was so dense in the sense of volume because he was all muscle. And of course, muscle is much heavier than fat without the volume. So when we went in the water, and this was particularly evident to me one day when we were going out and we were going to go spearing fish, and I got him to come and help me, because I'm very adept underwater, and I got him to come with me, and he was struggling to stay afloat. And I'm like, I can't believe this guy's in such amazing shape, but he can barely swim. But the bottom line was that he was so muscle bound that he was he was like a stone in the water, and he really struggled to swim.
Well, he's like a stone in many other aspects too, David. Because I was going to ask, does the guy have any personality? Did he tell a joke? Did he crack a smile at any point out there? Because we definitely didn't see it in the 2 episodes he was on.
Well, look, I was more interested in the fact that he was a superbly trained killer. That was where I was interested, and it was in that sense that I admired him, having been a member of the SAS and been in the Middle East and all those sorts of things. So I didn't need him to tell a joke. I could quite happily just smile while being in his presence.
I just keep thinking about the fact that if you had been, and gone, instead of going into politics, going into the military, like you would have been this master tactician in the military coming up with all these plans. I mean, I think it was a loss for the Defence Force not to have you in there.
Well, I don't know. I would never have pictured myself that way. I always saw myself on the ground fighting, is the thing. I frankly always wanted to join the US Marines, and when I was a teenager, my family was this close to moving to the United States, And so, that for me was a dream as a young person that almost came true in that sense. So, I always saw myself as being in the infantry, quite frankly, which a lot of people look down on, I suppose. But I always saw myself as being on the ground fighting. But it's all just a pipe dream of now a person who's an old man.
When you heard the season was going to be shot in Vanuatu, had you been to Vanuatu before, or was that exciting too? That here you're going to be playing this game in a little island country?
I've been to Vanuatu 13 times.
Wow!
This was my 14th trip to Vanuatu.
Oh wow!
It was nothing new where I was concerned as far as that was related. No.
What had brought you there so many times?
Well, I used to. In my misspent youth, I was a scuba diving instructor, and I owned dive shops. And one of the things that I used to do was I would take people on diving tours, and we would go to all over the Pacific. I mean, we went to lots of places, but one of the particular places that we would go to very regularly was Vanuatu, mostly because in the northern island of Vanuatu, Espiritu Santo, there's this extraordinary shipwreck called the SS President Coolidge, and it was a troop ship during World War II, but it was a luxury liner just prior to the war, converted to a troop ship, and it sank off one of the islands up in Espiritu Santo, off the mainland of that particular island. And it's the most accessible and probably one of the very best wreck dives in the world. You've got this ship that's 654 feet long, so talking nearly 200 meters long, and it's 81 feet wide, so 24 meters wide. This massive was 33,000 tons. It's a very, very, very big ship. Had like 5,000 troops on board when it ran aground just before it sank. And so it sank everything intact. It has all sorts of weaponry for defense. It has, its holds were full of various materials. I mean, back in the day, when we were sort of diving in the early 80s, there were cases of rifles, and there were, vehicles, and, there were Thompson submachine guns, lying around, and all manner of ammunition in the ready load lockers for the guns that were actually on the ship. It was an armoured troop ship, as they were, so 2 3-inch guns at the front and 2 3-inch guns at the back, and a 5-inch gun right on the stern, and all the related ammunition for that. And it had heaps and heaps of 20 millimeter Orkin anti-aircraft guns, and multiple double 50 caliber Browning machine guns, and all these sorts of things all over it. And plus it had the aspects of being the fact that it was a luxury liner. So you could go inside and you had all these cabins, and you had, a post office and a swimming pool, which was still to this day full of water, funnily enough.
Wow. Yeah. Yep. We'll add a laugh track in there later, David.
Wasn't just the swimming pool that was full of water. But there was also this marvelous statue of a lady with a unicorn, and a marble fireplace, and spiral staircase, and all these sorts of things. So you had all this amazing crossover of the war and everything left on the ship as it sank. Plus the fact that it was a massively big ship, especially for its day. Even today, it's still a big ship. And, of course, it had everything that it had previously on it from a luxury liner point of view. And you'd get into kitchens, and, we used to really deeply penetrate the wreck, which can be dangerous in itself. And there's a couple of times when we got a bit trapped, and some of it became a bit dicky, and we probably nearly died a couple of times. But, over the years, we really got to know it really well. Ultimately, we got the plans, the actual deck plans for the ship. So we were actually able to really follow where we could go next, and finding our ways in and out. And we even started diving it at night, which in itself is then just an entirely new realm to actually be penetrating a shipwreck in quite deep down decks and corridors and staircases, where the stairs, of course, have now all collapsed, so there's just a big hole that runs down with decks running off the sides. And the ship is on its side as well, so it's very disorienting, which itself is a challenge when you start to then employ the darkness as well as the depth and all of these things. It's really very adventurous.
Do you still dive today? Have you hung up the tank?
I have. I've hung up the tanks. I've hung up all the tanks and all the gear, and no, I haven't dived in not since 2000.
It actually makes sense now that you've spent that much time in Vanuatu, that when you got to the challenge with the Pidgin English, that you were able to understand what Dicko was saying to you. Was that a case that you just knew Pidgin English already, so you were the smart one when Dicko was thinking that he was going to hold one over your head, but you already knew what he was talking about?
Well, as a youth, I trained English pigeons, so it was quite a simple thing, having had many English pigeons as pets, that I would know Pidgin English.
Is there anything you haven't done? Honestly,
I haven't had sex with a man. But that's the only thing that immediately comes to mind.
that you know of. That you know of.
It's the only thing they weren't men as far as I knew.
Yeah.
Hey, these days, David, nothing surprises me.
I just want to say right now that might be the best answer we've ever had on this show.
Ever.
Right now, David, you're at 1 point in the David Oldfield column. Yep. That's an answer.
That is brilliant.
That's an answer. On the plane, or sort of when you landed in Vanuatu.
I don't think there's anything wrong with having sex with a man.
No.
Just not for me.
Just not for you. It's not. You're not quite there yet. Who knows?
Not yet.
I won't ever. Not in the vaguest sense.
Okay, so hang on. I'm going to scrap that question. Did you and Guy have sex? That is
scrap
off
it.
the list. Yep, scrap that question. Was there any conversations with any of the players before you got to play? Did you have a chance to have a simple sort of a glance, a g'day, how you doing? I mean, sort of any form of anything before you started playing the game?
Yeah, well, certainly with Guy and Wayne at the airport, and as we were going, and Guy kind of clued us up, with different things that we should be careful with, and Guy was wanting to sort of pretty much form an alliance then and there, which we tended to agree to. I had no reason not to, and so we kind of formed a bit of a we'll see what we can do to help each other out from the outset before we got on the plane, and also with Imogen in the hotel when we got to Vanuatu, where Imogen told me, I won't vote you out.
That early, like straight away?
Before we started, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Which of course turned out to be a lie.
Well,
I was going to say, it didn't exactly last that long for that one, but yeah.
We have plenty to talk to you about that, but what about, on day one when you start the game, there's only 9 people, because obviously Justin and Gabby weren't on the boat, and Ben Wynn wasn't in the game at that stage, so right from there, it looked like there was banter between you and Dicko. There's that. I think when he says, guys over here, girls over there, and you sort of joking around, and you go to move into the girls, and he sort of says a comment, and it sort of continues throughout the show. But it's basically a 2-part question. I want to know what you thought about the girls and the guys team, but we'll talk about Dicko first, the banter, because at the start it looked like throughout the initial episodes that he sort of almost didn't like you, where at the end you guys had this amazing banter between each other, which I think really makes the season.
Well, Dicko's akin to being a green left heading towards communism person. His socio-political views are naive but also extreme left, whilst at the same time being, like a lot of people in those circumstances, he's an extraordinary hypocrite in the sense that he's very capitalistically related as long as the paycheck is for him. So I could understand how Dicko would have felt where I was concerned, based on how people perceive me. But of course, if you don't actually know me and, we've never had those sorts of conversations, you take from elements of what it is that the media says about me rather than what I've said about myself. So there is always, if you've got any concept of me, it's preconceived, not so much on what I've said, but on what has been said about me. And I've always taken issue with that situation. So I would have expected that Dicko had very much preconceived ideas of me being, some extreme right-wing nut job, which I'm not. So I'm not surprised. I would have expected that he would have had some disdain for me from the outset.
Do you think by the end of it, though, that you two sort of did? Because it almost got to the point where it seemed like he was your biggest fan by what, episode 10 when you went out. Like it really did look, by watching it, that his opinion of you changed.
Well, it must have been just through gameplay, because we didn't really have any contact with Dicko. As I said, I didn't see Dicko apart from on set. And at the wrap party, that was it. I had no time spent with Dicko that wasn't actually on camera. So if he had a change of view or a variation of view from what he'd started with, it must have been as consequence of developing through what he was seeing. It wasn't from talking to him.
Later on, you obviously were on first contact with him. Did you guys talk much about Survivor when you were on first contact, sort of reminisce about the good old days of when you were on Survivor together?
A little bit, but not a lot, because, once again, where Dicko is concerned, Dicko's done lots of these things. He was the host on various failed television shows, and failed radio shows and those sorts of things. So, and of course, and also he had that extraordinary success with Australian Idol, and so Dicko has done a lot of these things. And I wasn't suggesting Survivor was a failure. In fact, Survivor I thought was quite a substantial success. And in fact, when you look at the numbers today of the ratings for Australian Survivor, any of the television channels would be overwhelmed to have those sorts of numbers watching any of their programs these days. And I think the peak of the show was about 1.4 million. I think the lowest number we had was about 960 or 970,000.
They'd kill for that now on Australian Survivor. Yeah.
A lot of prime time shows these days struggle to get 500,000.
Yeah. I think Australian Survivor gets sort of in the mid 600s. Sometimes a couple episodes might get to 700,000. Yeah.
So Celebrity Survivor, as it was from Channel 7, was only considered moderately successful at the time. But in comparison to what's on television these days and what people watch, with all of the different choices that they have, they'd kill for the sorts of ratings that they had from Celebrity Survivor. But I digress. I was saying that Dicko has done so many of these things and been engaged so much in the media since the days of when he left being a recording company executive to be on Australian Idol, that there wasn't a lot for us to say about Survivor particularly, but we certainly discussed it, because it was a great memory of mine. But see, once again, I hark back to the scenario that I didn't really talk to Dicko on Survivor. So all we really had were on-camera shared experiences. It wasn't like we'd hung out at the bar. Hey, remember that time at Layla Gone? There's a couple of local girls, you and me, Dicko.
I'm glad you said local girls and not local boys.
Dicko having enough to drink, who knows? But there wasn't any of that. So but I have wonderful memories myself of Survivor. Not, as I say, as much of Dicko, because we just didn't socialise except seeing him on camera.
Now, David, do you play golf? Because his last we hadn't seen Dicko for quite a few years, and he popped up on the show Holy Moly in the last few months, where he was dressed in a pirate suit. I think he even said on there that it was his big return to television. So I don't know if you're a bit of a like the mini putt golf, you could get yourself on Holy Moly and you might be able to reminisce with him again.
Yeah, I have no idea. Obviously, Holy Moly is some kind of golf game.
Yeah, it's like a putt show, and
you're not missing much. You're not missing
like
much.
A lot of people who'll probably see this. I don't even watch free-to-air television anymore.
Yeah.
So I just don't see any of these things. I mean, with Netflix and Prime and even the old DVD collection and YouTube. Oh, God, the amazing stuff on YouTube. Who really?
Yeah.
And podcasts, all the great podcasts out there that you got to listen to, including this one.
Don't worry, David. I don't watch Holy Moly either, but it was on the TV and I must have gone to change the channel. I looked up and I'm like, is that Dicko? Because there's this guy in a pirate suit. And I'm like, that's Dicko. So, so that's where he was last time we saw him on TV. But
I quite like Dicko in a sense. I find Dicko, the issue that I have with Dicko is that he's an enormous hypocrite. And that is always an issue with me for people in so many ways. But to sit down and sort of, I have had the chance since Survivor to sit down and have a drink here and there with Dicko. And I quite like banter with Dicko. And, Dicko is an intelligent man, somewhat misguided, but an intelligent man nonetheless, and trapped by an ideology that creates hypocrisy beyond belief. But, I do actually like him, though it even seems in the course of this conversation I'm finding all sorts of reasons not to.
It's funny because I think Dicko would have been under a lot of pressure when he came to Channel 7, and obviously they signed him up to host, Australian Celebrity Survivor, because they pulled him over. They obviously, we've learnt from David Mason, they sort of didn't really have a show for him. They're like, well, here, you're gonna host Survivor. And he probably, looking back now, you think he might have been a bit of an odd choice at the time, because he's not a physical guy. He's not the sort of guy you look at and think, oh yeah, he could rough it out in the jungle himself, But I think in the end, being a celebrity version, I guess there's that argument too, where he was probably the biggest celebrity on your season, yet he's the host. He's not actually playing. But I think in the end, he actually did a pretty good job. We've become pretty big fans of Dicko as the host of Celebrity Survivor.
I think that Dicko's always let down by his accent, to be quite frank. I think it's very difficult to be a presenter without a full grasp of the English language. And I'm not really quite sure what language Dicko speaks. I guess he speaks English because he's English. But no, I've always, sometimes what he says is quite difficult to understand because of the thickness of his accent. It has diminished a little bit over time. But no, I thought he did a good job on Survivor, because it was all a bit of a fun thing. But at the same time, he was fairly quick-witted, and he was able to, off the cuff, hit some good, laughing points. And, I enjoyed him being the host of the program while we were doing it.
Well, he definitely speaks a little bit of Bislama, because he actually does that throughout this season. He talks a little bit of Bislama.
He probably picked it up in a bar.
Yeah. Matt sort of alluded to before about thoughts on the boat, the girls and the guys. Obviously, Kakula starts off mainly guys, and then obviously Gab joins it. Looking back sort of on those early days, was that something that you think helped you, kind of being around the guys and then sort of having Gab? Would you prefer to have a few more of the girls around you at that point? Kind of how was that working out for you early on in the game?
Look, there was always going to be a bit of a struggle with the girls, because many of the girls are not all that physical. And, if they'd been, the Australian women's netball team or Australian women's cricket team or Australian female athletes of some kind, that would have been entirely different. But obviously you had Fiona Horn, who was fairly fit and able to grasp whatever was thrown at her. But then you had Imogen, who was like throwing up within 24 hours and looked like she was going to die. Nicolle was not very physical at all, and Amber also was very much, she's a princess's sidekick. She's not somebody you'd want in the post-apocalyptic world. Most of the girls would have been eaten, and not in a good way, in sort of, within 48 hours of anything realistically taking place. The exception potentially would have been Kim Johnson, who was extraordinarily fit, but hated it so much that she wanted to get off the show. But I'm sure she could have gone forward and done well, because she was very fit and agile and, an extraordinarily capable young woman. Fiona the same, in the sense that Fiona was also very, very fit and was marvellous in swimming challenges because she had those big balloons. But the other girls were kind of, they were bikini model actress fodder.
So, you mentioned obviously having had those chats with Wayne sort of beforehand, and kind of the conversation with Imogen, but like when you were on the beach, was there, the bond with Elton, was that formed sort of early on? Was there much talk with Wayne? Kind of, do you remember sort of any of those earlier conversations that were happening in game?
Look, you get, there was just a level of understood cooperation, because Wayne and Guy and I had chatted, as I say, at the airport, and so we kind of buddied up in that sense. Wayne was always one of those people who believes his own press statements, and Wayne ultimately came unstuck as a consequence of that, as you know, because he started sort of, boss Gabby around and started to treat her like she was an idiot. And so even if she was, that probably wasn't the best approach in that sense, because she had an equal vote to him. So it's Wayne sort of undid himself a bit, and I'm not sure that Wayne was ever the sort of person that I would necessarily get along with generally. I like Guy, and in fact, Guy rang me a couple of weeks ago. I think he must have done something with you guys. Did he do something with you guys a couple of weeks ago?
We've tagged him a lot on social media. He did the Survivor Hall of Fame, Australian Survivor Hall of Fame we did last year, sort of did a little bit with that. I think just with the social media stuff we've done with tagging you guys, a lot of you have sort of had that, I think, brought out a lot. Imogen is sort of talking about it a little bit more as well. And, Kim obviously talked about Amber. So Fiona, so maybe we've just opened this can of worms for you all, David, to get you all start talking again 15 years later.
Must have been something you did with David Mason then. Something prompted him to give me a call. I haven't spoken to him for a few years. But as soon as I saw his number, I knew it was him, because I just have a bit of a thing for numbers. And I always liked Guy, and I always had a huge level of respect for Guy, as an athlete, and as an extraordinarily capable athletic man. Always had a great deal of respect for him, and still do to this day. Elton also, in that I love the game of rugby union. My children both play rugby union. I played rugby union, but obviously nothing like the sort of level of capacity that Elton has. And, so I respected Elton. I thought Elton was a really nice young man, because bear in mind, I was also the oldest contestant in that series.
Yeah.
So, to me, I was old enough to be Elton's father. And, I respected and really liked Elton. I thought he was a really likable, nice young man. And I don't know, so we got along straight away. Maybe he saw me as being a bit older and, maybe being a bit helpful in that sense. I don't know.
Was Elton your plan to, that if you were going to get to the final two, it would be you and Elton? Was that sort of your plan after maybe a week in the game?
I don't know that we actually had a plan like that. The only plan that we really had was that the boys were going to try and stick together as much as possible. And they broke us up and put us in with the girls and that sort of thing. And so those things changed to a degree, but there was no great strategy going forward from my point of view as to, well, if I get in the final two, it's not something that this is perhaps going to seem strange, but I tend not to plan too strongly for that which may not occur. Because keep in mind that these things are very fluid. And without certain completely uncontrollable factors taking place, none of it finishes the way that it did. And you pull out what seems like the most minute detail of something that took place, and the whole end game changes.
Yeah.
If I go for an example of that, the first person who should have been off the show was Imogen. And the only reason Imogen didn't go was because, Kim Johnston was begging to go home. So whereas they were going to get rid of Imogen the very first elimination, Kim said, no, please, I can't stand it. I want to go home. Send me home, send me home, send me home. And that saved Imogen. So it saved Imogen for another day, and Imogen, of course, kept going. Now, if Imogen had been eliminated, which would have been the appropriate thing, first elimination, well, Imogen wouldn't have been there at the point to approach me in the darkness of the night and say, let's get rid of, she wouldn't have been there to do that. She wouldn't have buddied up with Nicolle. Them as a couple of really quite weak people made themselves stronger by being, of course, a twosome. And societally and historically, that's how weak people make themselves strong, by banding together. And so none of that would have happened if indeed Kim Johnson hadn't hated the show so much and hated being there so much that she begged to go home. Imogen would have gone home, and goodness knows what would have happened from then on, because Imogen herself became such a major factor behind the scenes in how and when people became eliminated. She wouldn't have
Queen
been
Imogen. Queen Imogen, David. That's what we refer to her on this show. Queen Imogen.
She'd probably rather be a princess, I would think.
Well, elevated as 15 years. I'm sure she would get to Queen of that. It's so fascinating, though, to hear you sort of say that, and going back to when you were saying about how you'd never seen the show, because one thing I think we get from watching it is that I think it would be the opposite. I think you knew everything. You were in the guy level of having watched this show so much. You were playing this, you were playing that, because it just seems so fluid. It seems so natural to you to kind of, the ability that you had to be able to live up to this master tactician label that you sort of got out there, and the puppet master. I mean, do you put that down to just your profession as a politician, that you've got to be sort of very, well-spoken, capable of reading people, kind of, doing that sort of things? I mean, is it just a natural ability that you feel you have to be able to progress in the way that you did through the game?
It's certainly going to be more likely geared towards that than being familiar with the game, because I wasn't familiar with the game at all. So, I mean, Survivor, as far as I'm concerned, Survivor is just really life, and the game of life, if we put it that way, in the sense of the ugliness of politics and propaganda and the circles that I'd previously moved in, perhaps placed me in a good sense to understand psychologically how other people were placed and where they would fit in or not fit in, and how I needed to fit in with them to get along under certain circumstances. By the same token, I was largely just really being myself. I probably tweaked a few things here and there, but in many respects, I just tried to stay off people's radar, not run too fast, not swim too fast, not do anything too smart, unless I absolutely, really seriously had to.
You were getting called all these names, these labelled the puppet master, all these great names. I mean, at what point your head must start to swell when they're giving you such compliments. Like, if you're getting called the master tactician, the puppet master, I mean, deep down you must be thinking, I'm playing this game pretty well. Like, to be getting labelled with these sort of, because no one else was getting labelled the puppet master or the master tactician.
Yeah, so, well, that's where I suppose I'm a bit different. I don't actually think all that highly of myself particularly. I wouldn't say I have low self-esteem, but I don't get a swelled head about things that I do. I always judge everything in the factors of how it comes about without automatically entertaining the notion that it's all as a consequence of my phenomenal ability. It's like what I just said about the Imogen scenario. I mean, I finished up where I was, or I wouldn't have finished up where I was, quite likely, if the simple factor of Imogen going home first rather than him hadn't taken place. So, I'm not a person who is overwhelmed with a sense of my own significance. I'm really not. So when they were saying things like that, I was sort of like, I wasn't embarrassed, but I thought, this is just all part of the course. It's all part of the game. It's all part of what we're sort of showing for, the audience and that sort of stuff. I never really thought terribly much of it. I never suspected that they actually really thought that. In fact, towards the end, Guy told me that, it was interesting, when Guy rang the other day, or a couple of weeks back now, he said he didn't really, until now, fully understand why I was so angry at the time with Imogen and Nicolle. But he really now, 15 years later, fully gets it. And, it's just funny how all of these things sort of fall into place or not. And, you can, I never create something that hasn't happened. I never BS about something because it's too easy to have it all come undone by the actions of others. So you're better off always using what's true in your favour rather than just making something up, because so many things can fall apart as a consequence of things that you're just not responsible for at all. You can think you're in control. It's a big mistake to think you're fully in control, because you're not fully in control of what other people do.
Which, it's so fascinating in watching you throughout the game, though, because ultimately when you get voted out, you've got Justin Melvey and all that saying that you're the one pulling the strings, doing all this sort of stuff. But to me, it almost just seemed like that was the point when people actually realised that, because when the swap came and kind of things were happening there, you seemed to always be in the thick of the action, the decisions, and even in the merge, you sort of, even when you were outnumbered and seemingly on the chopping block, you still seemed to have a voice in what was going on. So it's such a unique season 2 of Australian Survivor, because you know, we said this last week. You came out of that season, I would argue, the best player on that season. And yet, for a large portion of the season, everybody didn't seem to see what you were doing. And even you almost didn't seem to see what you were doing clearly based on what you're telling us today.
Well, no, I wouldn't say I didn't see what I was doing. You know, I took every opportunity here and there to manipulate everything that I possibly could at every level. I did that, not because I know how to play the game of Survivor, but just because I suppose I am a survivor in many respects. You know, I'm a survivor in many respects in life rather than the television show. And for me, Survivor was just life. That's how I saw it. And I was surrounded by people with whom in that group I had to survive for a certain purpose. In this case, it was to keep going forward in the game. So, no, look, I manipulated everything that I possibly could everywhere down the line. But at the end of the day, and this is what I started to get onto, and then I went off on another tangent myself just a few seconds ago, it was Guy who at the time said to me, these girls are afraid of you. And I said, well, what do you mean they're afraid of me? Because I don't know whether this has ever come out at any stage, but Guy and Justin tried to get me to join them to get rid of the girls when the two of them came back into the game. And I wouldn't do it because I'd done a deal with the girls, and that was it. And they told me a whole range of things about what the girls were planning that, to me, couldn't. I mean, I was suspicious, but it didn't make any sense. Now, little did I know they were morons. It just didn't occur to me that they could be so stupid as to do what I was being told they were going to do. So I didn't fall for it, whereas I should have probably fallen for it. But I didn't side with Guy and Justin because I'd done a deal with the girls. And I didn't stay with that deal because I thought they would stay with that deal for the same reason. I thought they would stay with the deal because it was the smart thing to do. It didn't occur to me they could possibly be so stupid as to do what they did. And Guy explained to me that they were frightened of me. I said, what do you mean they're frightened of me? They said, they think you're too smart. They think that you know too much about what's going on, I said, what are you talking about? And of course, now I think back on it then, you know, I had the conversation with Imogen and Nicolle when there was just the three of us there. And I would say, right, I don't know I really don't recollect if much of any of this actually ever made it to camera, but I sat down, or you know, probably got cut, but I sat down with the girls and said, look, this is how it is. There's the three of us. And they said, yes. I said, there's one or two people coming back in. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to be one. I don't know if it's going to be two. It won't be more than two. But I don't know who they're going to be, whether they're going to be people who've already been here or whether they're going to be new people we haven't seen yet. But there's one, possibly two people coming back in, and this is going to expand and go on. And they were both, but that's not fair. And I was like, well, I'm sorry, but which part of this from day one did you think was fair? You know, I was sort of gobsmacked. That's not fair, you know. And they said, anyway, how do you know? How do you know? I said, well, because, you know, I knew perfectly at the time. I don't recollect particularly now, sort of 15 years later, but I said, well, you know, this is day 19 or day 20 or whatever it is. And there's, you know, we're on the island for X number of days. So there's 6 days left. And, you know, the challenges have been challenge, reward, 2-day, you know, program. And there's just simply not enough of us to get us through to the end of where the show goes. And they both looked at me completely blankly for what seemed like a lifetime. And suddenly one of them said, how do you know what day it is?
Wow.
And I was like, well, it's, you know, whatever it was. I said, it's Tuesday, or whatever, and this is, you know, week 3, and we've been here X number of days. And once again, there was this silence, and how do you know what day it is? And I'm like, because I've been counting. Been counting the days. I've
yeah.
The sequence of what happens.
Yeah.
How do you know how many days are left? I said, well, I know how many days are left because I know what day it is. And I just, it never occurred to me that they were that out of touch with everything. And now it kind of more makes sense. So apparently that conversation I had with them frightened them to such a degree that they decided they had to get rid of me. I was the danger. And I was the danger. They had two guys that had just had a week, refreshing themselves, who were both younger than me, both fitter than me, coming back. And, and they came back. I was never the danger. Their worst case scenario was one of them finishing with me. And their more likely scenario was us eliminating Justin, and then eliminating me, and the two of them being at the finish. That would have been a fairly straightforward thing for them to create with my help as a third vote right in the first thing. And I said, when these people come back, whether there's one or there's two, we stay together as three. There's not going to be more than two. Three always outvotes two. Whoever gets the immunity challenge, it can't be both of them, so we get rid of that person. And then there's the three of us trying to get the next immunity challenge. That's a 3-to-1 odd that one of us will get it, and then we vote out the next person. Then, girls, we're back to you two and me, which is the original last three, and do what you like from there. It's all good. And if I finish up going out as being running third, well, I completely understand. That was the conversation I had with them. And apparently that conversation was the nail in my own coffin.
Who would ever think that simply by counting the days and knowing what day it is, that can cost you your place in Survivor? So anyone that's listening to this that might be lucky enough to go on and play Survivor, never let people know what day it is, because they might just go and vote you out.
Pretty much. And that was it. I just, because I fully comprehended how long we'd been there, how long we were going to be there, where we were in the game, the fact that people were going to be coming back in because there weren't enough time, and this is how it was all going to work. It has to unfold this way. It doesn't make sense. And I actually said to them, what do you think? They're just going to film us laying around on the beach for a couple of days?
I just thought it was going to turn into a cooking show, David Oldfield's cooking show.
It was just, and that was the fact that I understood everything that was happening, and then worse, that it came true. Exactly what I said was going to happen did happen. That was the nail in my coffin. I was too dangerous. They had to get rid of me. And through all of that, they still couldn't work out. There was then 2 against 2. I mean, why would you do that to yourselves? It just, 3 always outvotes 2.
While we're on the topic of that twist in the game where Guy Leach and Justin Melvey come back, what are your thoughts about that? I know Survivor's not fair. I mean, even current day Survivor, it's not a fair game. It's certainly, there's no one can argue with that these days. It was probably a little bit fairer back when you played it. It's definitely not fair now. But what's your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think they should have done it a bit earlier instead of like on day 19 of a 25-day game? I
don't know, because I'm not writing the show. I don't know what it is they're particularly trying to achieve. It's I don't feel qualified to sort of jump at that particularly. Should they have introduced 2 completely new people? I suppose that could have looked much worse than bringing back people that had already been eliminated, because at least they'd been through some of it rather than potentially just arriving fresh, never having been seen before, and suddenly you're in the box seat to potentially win. So maybe it would have been better to just not bring anybody back and start with enough contestants in the first place to not have it happen, not need it to happen.
David talked a little bit about that in his interview, and kind of he says in hindsight he kind of regrets it and wish he had done it a little bit differently. I'd like to just quickly, you talk about sort of that conversation with Imogen and Nicolle. Back when sort of you and Elton were the ones outnumbered on the merge, there was that conversation where you had with Imogen at that point, like, hey, Elton and I, Imogen and Nicolle, like this is a foursome there. Was that kind of the first real strategic talk you'd had with Imogen? Did you have other strategic talks with her on Moso after of the swap? Because it seemed like you two had almost like a hidden alliance always in the background that kind of didn't really come into fruition until you made that decision to take out Gabby rather than forcing a tie to take out Nicolle.
Yeah. Well, look, there was an underlying feeling that I had. I, to a degree, will fundamentally trust a person based on what they say to me and what I may know about them. It's a sad thing that you have to treat a lot of people these days with a very large element of distrust. And to some people watching, that will seem awful, and to others it'll seem naive that I would even say that. But, I think we all, people generally like the idea of being able to trust people. And somewhere down the line, you're going to have to trust people, at least to a degree. Now, Imogen and I had the conversation. I didn't know anything about Imogen at the time, but we had mutual friends, and she had, without me asking, had offered before we even got into the game, while we were still in the hotel, before we left the first day, that she would not vote me out. And this was in theory on the basis because we both were very good friends with a mutual couple. So, I had some view that I could potentially have some trust in Imogen. That was bolstered by the fact that, I saw Imogen as being physically weak. And so she needed to build, more around her to go further. So alliances were in her interests. So you get a combination of mutual friends. She had offered this in the first place, and she needs to do something with me in many respects as much as we need to do it with her. So, there's a mutual profit in this. So, that caused me to be able to feel that I could talk to them. I actually put more belief in Nicolle than Imogen. I thought Nicolle was actually genuinely more trustworthy, but at the same time, Nicolle was, ultimately and quite clearly throughout the game, I think was dominated by Imogen. So she tended to, it was more Imogen who was doing the thinking for the two of them. Nicolle was sort of really just sort of going along.
Which, just on that, I mentioned recently one of our recaps with Nicolle, I said, and you can sort of either back this up or shut me down on my opinion, that Nicolle at one point seemed like the most dangerous person in the game because she seemed so likable. She seemed so liked. People seemingly weren't looking at her as a threat and challenges and everything along those lines. Was she considered that way, that if she got to the end, she could be very dangerous to win because there really wasn't anything that seemed negative you could say about Nicolle?
Yeah, look, there was no one that I was aware of was ever concerned about Nicolle and Imogen. They were seen as fillers. They were not seen as being in any way a threat in any challenge. Neither of them were going to outswim or outrun anybody. That's just a physical fact. It's just, the way it is. If you think about, the most dominant challenge that stays in my mind that Imogen won was finding a key in the sand.
Yes.
Anyone could do it.
That was when you were looking for divine intervention, according to Dicko, when you were just kind of doing that weird little thing on top of the sand. Yes.
Yeah, well, you've got to try and work out, you need to find this thing in a hurry. How are you going to do that? If you're going to, if you want to find it absolutely, you've got all the time in the world, you can do it very systematically.
Mm-hmm.
You can dig up the whole area, in a system like a grid. But
did you ever find it? Did you ever find that key?
I don't think I ever found a key. No, I'm not sure. But I don't remember. But the point that I'm making, of course, that finding a key in the sand is just like pulling an ace out of a deck of cards.
Yeah.
It's not exactly a skill. So neither Imogen nor Nicolle were ever seen by anybody as being any great threat, but in the sense of, because they were not seen as any great threat, they could just sort of keep on creeping forward. And to a degree, that's what I was doing myself. As I said to you a little bit earlier, I made a point of never running as fast as I could run, never swimming as fast as I could swim, never diving as deep as I could dive, never doing anything that suggested that I was, maybe more physical than a middle-aged guy who was just kind of, okay.
Because, you still walked away with 3 immunities, David.
Yeah, well, I had to. I had to. I only ever really tried when I was, in trouble, and particularly that last immunity where I, swam the 3 lengths and let Lisa only did the 1. If I had not won that, then I would have been straight out. So, I had to sort of do something then. So, and the puzzle challenge to a degree as well. The puzzle challenge probably was, my own ego in that, I didn't want to seem like a dummy that couldn't remember something. So, I thought it was necessary to win that. But at the same time, I didn't see that as being giving too much away. because I was mostly dealing with people who were, I wasn't dealing with anybody. There were no Einsteins in the group, so I wasn't sort of dealing with anybody with any vast intellectual capacity. So no one was going to be too worried about the fact that I'd done the puzzle.
It's so fascinating to hear that about Nicolle and Imogen, because when it gets to the final four and you've got that opportunity to break them up by tying it up, going with Gabs, to me, and like as you were just saying there before, you had worked out the fact that there was going to be people coming back because of the days. That seemed, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you were playing the long game at that point. The smart thing maybe would be, if you only had a couple of days left, of course you break up Nicolle and Imogen, because you need to break up a power couple. But having worked out that there have to be people coming back in the game, you cyber them, you've saved their lives, you've got an alliance of 3 versus 2. Was that about the long game? Did you legitimately think about breaking them up at that point, but it was more about the long game for you at that point?
Yes, there was no question that by the time we got to that point, and I was never of the view as to what point I may or may not get to. It was very much a daily struggle, and I think it's a mistake to be planning too far ahead with all of the things that can be undermined all the way along the line. You can focus on what may be and the various alternatives to what needs to happen if things go amiss on what is otherwise a straight path. But yes, by the time we got to where there was Nicolle and Gabby and Imogen and me, by the time we got to that point, it was, as far as I was concerned, the wiser thing to do was to go with Nicolle and Imogen to save Nicolle, which was Imogen. Imogen and Nicolle, of course, mostly worried about one of them being voted off. So I was endearing myself to them. At the same time, I wouldn't have trusted Gabby as far as I could throw her, and in the old way that things would be said. So I didn't particularly overly trust any of them, but I placed a little bit more trust in the circumstances of doing them a favour and keeping that couple in than keeping Gabby in and breaking it up. Because, but quite frankly, I think if I had broken it up and got rid of Nicolle, Gabby and Imogen would have ganged up together. And so I then would have had a couple who were posed against me rather than a couple who were thankful that I did what I did. I'm quite certain that would have happened because the girls were playing this girl power. I thought it was with the Spice Girls there at one stage. They were playing this girl power thing. I don't know if any of this actually made it to the series, but you had Gabby and Imogen and Nicolle sort of sitting around saying, "Hey, wouldn't this be great if a girl won? Hey, a girl could win. A girl could win." It was like, it was like the Me Too movement of the year 2006. It was like, wouldn't this be great? It was like there was some social statement was going to be made if a girl won, and it could be one of us. We'll all be together. It's girl power, girl power. They were like that, and I'm like, oh, Jesus, this isn't much good. I mean. They're focused on, they don't seem to understand that they're focused on gender politics in the game of Survivor. And, but what it really was three people who in many respects were fundamentally weak, making themselves feel better and finding a common denominator, which was their gender. I was never going to fit into that quite clearly. I was immediately the enemy. Once they decided that they were three girls and that's what they were first and foremost, then I was on the outer immediately. I was dead and gone. So I had to win that challenge. That was the first thing. Then the second thing was, okay, yes, longer scenario. I can probably find more trust in doing the right thing for Nicolle and Imogen than I can siding with Gabby and getting rid of Nicolle, because all that will happen is that the girl power will just be 2 instead of 3, but they'll both be against me.
While we're on the topic of trust, a big issue in your season was the Justin Melby bribery scandal. What it looked like at Tribal when that all got brought up, that you had some involvement of telling Imogen some information. What can you tell us about what actually went down? Because none of it really got shown, or none of it got shown on camera. All of a sudden, the audience, we're watching this episode, and then it gets to Tribal, and Imogen is bringing up all this bribery scandal issue with Justin, and they're looking at you, and you're saying, well, I haven't told you a lie. Everything I've said is true, but they don't really explain it. And then it just sort of disappears. And then a couple of episodes later, Justin's back in. What actually happened?
Well, my recollection was that it was all coming from Amber. Sorry, not from Amber, from Imogen. My understanding of it was that, you had the scenario there for a while where Justin was over with the girls. So there was and Justin was, the Sultan with a harem in many respects. And he was sort of, very buddy with Fiona. So they were like king and queen of the girl team. And Justin somehow had them thinking, I really don't understand the mechanics of how all this took place, but somehow Justin had them thinking that he should win. I don't know how anyone gets anybody sort of thinking that, but Justin had them genuinely thinking he could win. And I think part of how he did that was probably because not very many of them thought they could win themselves. So, I mean, if you were Imogen or Nicolle, you'd be hardly going into this thinking you could win. You're going into it because they're in a certain place in their careers and they're going to get paid and they're going to go to a tropical island and maybe it'll get them something else. I mean, that's why you're doing it. And indeed, I did it because I was planning on retiring from Parliament and I thought, I really would like to go into the media. I wasn't absolutely certain at that point of what I wanted to do in the media, but I thought it was a good media opportunity for me to undertake. And the money was more than fair. So that was how I came to do it. I also thought it would be entertaining and good fun. I didn't realise how much I was going to enjoy it, but it was all rolled up into the decision to actually do it. There was never a question for me about me doing it. I thought it was fundamentally a good move from a media point of view for what I was planning for my future career. The same is true of them. I mean, you've got Nicolle, who I don't think she'd done any acting for years. She was seeing this as a recycled chance of something. You've got Imogen, who was always trying to break out from being a bikini model into being a presenter of some kind. So it was, an opportunity for them. So, but they wouldn't have necessarily ever thought they were going to win. I didn't go in with the expectation that I could win. I didn't think I knew enough about it, but I learned about it pretty quickly. And I learned pretty quickly that survival was just really life. There wasn't, it was life in an extreme scenario. That's all it really was. So at some point, however he did it, and I suspect it's because the others thought they couldn't win, Justin convinced them that he should be allowed to win and they should support him in winning. So he basically really had created Team Justin. And somewhere in that, it appears there's been some suggestion of a payoff. There's the sort of, what's in it for us? And there's the, okay, we can't win, but why should we really help you? And he was like, I'm going to get this $100,000 on top. So, I'm going to share that around. That was the way it was put to me, not by Justin, but the way it was put to me by people in the girls' team. And I was under the impression it was Imogen that told me. I mean, apologies if I'm somehow wrong, but that's my recollection of how it all came together.
It's the biggest mystery of this season. We asked it to David Mason. He wasn't sure. Obviously, when we get Imogen on, Nicolle on, and if we get Justin on, we'll ask a question to them as well. But because it's just the way it's edited, and I think David Mason had some production notes that he would release every week on the Channel 7 website, and we've tracked them down. And even he said in one of the ones around that week that they just didn't film anything on camera what was happening, and it shows because that episode is one of the weirdest episodes of Survivor. It's this thing's brought out of nowhere, nothing's really explained, and then Justin gets voted out. So it's the way you explain that, because in traditional Survivor, the very few rules that there are, one of the key rules is you cannot conspire to share your winnings to bribe people and say like, hey, I'm going to win in the US $1 million. I'll give you half of it if you're not allowed to do that. Yeah. And that's where, when we were talking about that episode, if that's specifically not in your rules, if you got given any rules, then Justin's not breaking any rules by maybe offering a bit of money. And I'm like, well, there's no rules. Why not offer it? It's playing the game. So while some people might frown upon, Imogen clearly was very much against it. Hence why, she risked the immunity and sort of, wanted to speak out against it. But again, it's sort of like, if there's no rules written down and Justin can openly do that, then he's doing what he can to win the game, right?
Look, I'm not aware of us ever being given any rules. Certainly nobody suggested anything along the lines of, it never occurred to me to make such a deal myself, but I certainly don't remember being told we couldn't do that. So your point is quite valid. Justin, by doing so, if that's what he did, and that seems to be what took place, or allegedly took place, then he probably didn't do anything wrong. And I think that I think Imogen's reaction to it was a bit crocodile tears like. I don't think she was really fussed about it. I think.
Well, she made up with him pretty quickly when he came back in the game, didn't she?
Well, I mean, Imogen is a creature of need, and so there was always going to be whatever was going to get Imogen to the next square.
Just on Justin quickly. I mean, the episode also when he got voted out initially, it seemed like all of a sudden you two had this massive rivalry. I mean, was that something that had happened along the way? Was it edited that way? I mean, kind of what was that relationship like with Justin when he eventually went home?
Look, once again, there was an element of Justin that I quite admired. I mean, Justin had a black belt in karate. He was a very, very high level snow skier. He was a very athletic, very balanced, very capable guy where these things were concerned. And I admired that. Quite genuinely in Justin, and in fact, I'm pretty sure I said that in my book. But what I found a bit difficult with Justin is that Justin had been an actor from a very, very young age, and he didn't seem to have much to offer that wasn't on script. He just didn't. He wasn't a person of great conversation when it came to things that were new or were occurring, things that were off cuff. He was not a great ad-libber or contributor to conversation and those sorts of things. And it was sort of like, well, no one's holding up a cue card, so he doesn't have anything to say. I found Justin very much like that. And that's not something that I found sort of filled with skill. And so I didn't like that part of him. But I mean, by the same token, you can't dislike someone just because they have difficulty stringing a sentence together that isn't cued for them.
You wouldn't like me at all then, based on that?
Well, no, I mean, I don't dislike people for that reason. It was just an observation that I made of Justin. I mean, Justin didn't seem to have much in the way of what I would call an original thought. It was almost like from a very early age, he'd spent his life scripted. And it was like from a very early age, he probably had a great deal of difficulty separating Justin Melby from whatever role he was playing. And I think that's probably true of a lot of actors. They start to think they're the role, not the person that they are. It's kind of the two sides of a coin of people who love a particular actor. But the actor, and I'm not talking about Justin in this sense, but just who love a particular actor, and the actor might be one of the biggest arseholes walking the face of the earth when it comes to being a person, but their fans don't relate to that. They only relate to the person they see on screen. It's a bit along that line for me, but it's the opposite side of the coin, where the actor themselves starts to think of themselves more as being who they play rather than who they are. And I found Justin a bit like that, as if there was never really, we could never really be sure, and even Justin himself was never really sure who Justin Melby was. He was Justin Melby on Days of Our Lives, whoever that character was, and he was, this character over here, or all the things he'd been in. It was like he'd never really had his own life. He'd lived the lives that were scripted for him in various roles in various television and movie productions.
Do you think Justin found more value in being on more episodes than he did actually in the money he was getting to be on the show, and that's maybe why he was offering money to get to the end, because that way he's getting more exposure, he's on more episodes?
Quite possibly. I think Justin was certainly, I think, interested in the potential exposure that he may have gotten as a consequence of winning Survivor. Yes, I think that's a valid observation.
When you ultimately get voted out, you answered a question that I was going to ask you about, how close were you to siding with Guy and Justin. But, I mean, you could see the disappointment in your face. You could see the almost shock, your final words there, basically calling them out as, for what they were, doing that, stabbing you in the back. I mean, You clearly, did you have any idea that you were going home that night? Did you honestly just think like, I'm 100% safe, I'm with the girls, this is not going to happen? And then when your torch has been snuffed by Dicko, you just went on a rage back at Ponderosa when you went back there, and Elton and Gabby copped a bit of a spray maybe?
Yeah, look, this is where I was stupid, and hopefully it's not a stupidity that I'll repeat, or an act of stupidity that I'll repeat. And I know, look, I hate to cite once again the notion of, I don't think the way a lot of people think, and there are things that upset me that probably don't upset people in the same way. And here's an example of it. I didn't mind so much that they turned on me. What I didn't like was that, apart from the disloyalty factor of it, what I didn't like was that I knew there was no gain in it for them. It was a stupid thing. More than anything else that can even be done against me personally, I loathe acts of blatant stupidity. And it was such a blatant act of stupidity, of such moronic, imbecilic behaviour from people who, I don't know, were just brain starved. I don't know. That was what upset me the most, because I knew that at the point that they got rid of me, they lost. They were going to lose. They were done like dinners. They had two relatively smart, game-playing, highly athletic, fresh guys in a strong alliance against these two girls who were not at any stage, even when they were at peak condition, terribly athletic and capable, and had been there, had been starved and weakened on top of all of that for 3 weeks by then. There was no prospect for them to do anything but lose and fall over one after the other. And that's exactly what happened. So when they're doing this to me, it's going through my head, yeah, this would be easier for me if one of you now actually could win. But what's going to happen is you're both going to, this is all going in my head. What's going to both happen here is you're both going to lose. You have gotten rid of me to no actual gain to yourselves. And all you've done is made this extraordinary enemy who is now on the jury that is going to do everything possible to get rid of you and make that real. And that was what upset me the most, that I was disposed of in a disloyal and dishonest sense for no actual gain, but actually to their detriment. So it was the stupidity of the act more than anything else that raised my anger. Does that make any sense to you?
It does, yeah. It's actually, I love hearing it explained that way, because, I mean, we're obviously, next week's episode that we're doing here will be the recap post your elimination, so episode 11. Yeah. And obviously everything that goes down in that, ultimately you and the jury get to decide, that Nicolle goes home. But yeah, in hindsight, it is a pretty ridiculous decision. And the thing that, like, we talked about last week as well, we actually really praise Guy and Justin for being able to get them to do it, which is something that I think that it doesn't get credit for. It's a sad fact about your season that it's so remembered for this god-awful twist. And can I just say, left on a cliffhanger last week, Matt, I said I was going to announce last week what I thought the most stupidest twist in Australian Survivor history was. Clarify, this season, it is the worst twist in Australian Survivor history. But on that, it's all well and good to say it's confined by this twist and that Guy's win is taken down a little bit because, he didn't play the full game. But you've got to give Guy and Justin credit for being able to get Imogen and Nicolle to side with them to vote you out, because, again, David Mason said he was fearful that they're going to go straight away and then, boom, that was a pointless twist. Well, the opposite happened. You get voted out, then Nicolle goes next, then Imogen gets next, and the two returning players end up in the final two. The fans hate it because that's not what they want, but in terms of a production, David, well, he kind of probably got, maybe in a weird way, what he probably wanted. So my long-winded question or anything along those lines with that, David, not really a question, it's more of a statement to answer what you were saying, is that what you said makes sense. It's incredibly unique, and it's just testament to Guy and Justin for being able to pull it off.
Yeah, no, look, as far as I was concerned, Guy, was the person who most deserved to win when it came down to it. And, I did everything behind the scenes that I possibly could to help him in that sense. And, I obviously voted for him myself, and I don't think I had to encourage Elton terribly much to vote for Guy, but it made sense that Guy, should be the winner. And when it came down to him and Justin at the end, that was a pretty straightforward choice for me. But when they did what they did to me, I immediately understood what was going to happen, and I was gobsmacked. I was also thinking, I just can't believe that I didn't see that coming. I just didn't see it coming, because I didn't see that they wouldn't see that the whole act was in fact not in their interests. And that was it. You've disposed of me in a fashion that is not actually serving your own interests. And behind the scenes, I later find out that, actually before it all happened, when Guy and Justin were talking to me, and we went out on a fruit picking thing together, and that was when they were talking to me about it all. They're saying, this is what they're going to do, this so and so and so. And I didn't argue with them too much about it. I just sort of took it all in. I said, look, I have an arrangement with them, and I have to stand by the arrangement, and that's how it is. So I can see what you're saying, but we'd also appreciate that whilst I'm not going to say that you're lying to me, it's in your interest to tell me these things, and so on. And I went and kind of fronted the girls about it to a degree, and I couldn't really get much of I didn't front them as strongly as I probably should have, because I was also not wanting to offend them particularly. But as it turned out, it was just an extraordinarily foolish thing to do, and I'm sorry that I didn't picture that someone wouldn't see that coming. I mean, you should have been able to see it coming a mile away. And Justin and Guy were telling me how the girls were saying to them, it was like a couple of 9-year-olds having a couple's marbles game. No, this is Survivor. You're down to these last few people. It's a major television show. But for Imogen and Nicolle, they were talking to Justin and Guy about it as if they were 9-year-olds playing marbles. This is going to be great. It's going to be there'll just be the four of us. There'll be the two girls and the two guys, and it's sort of like couples against each other. Oh, it's going to be beautiful. That's how they were. I was like, how could you be so mindless about all of this? How could you not see what you're doing? How could you not see how you are so seriously disadvantaging yourself? You're actually voting out your ally. And that was what got to me.
After you got voted out, did you have any interactions with David Mason or any other production members where they were in shock as well that had happened, that you had got voted out?
I don't think so. Look, they never gave very much away, but I got the impression that me being voted out didn't suit what they wanted. I got that impression, but I'm not sure of it. I'm not sure of that. But I got the impression, however I got the impression that really it didn't suit what they wanted to keep filming for me to suddenly not be there.
So you must have loved that the next episode after you being voted out, that you got to have involvement in obviously splitting up those girls and ultimately one of them going home.
Well, of course, I knew that was going to happen because we understood that we would be the judges. So, I knew that was going to happen. So, once again, as I say, you're not only voting out your ally and keeping in your enemies, you're also making your ally an enemy and putting him on a panel that then determines who's going to ultimately win. So, how could you be that silly? Why did I not see that people could be that silly? So I was also upset with myself for underestimating the foolishness that people can be led to.
But trying to prepare for stupidity is the hardest thing to prepare for, because you don't know how stupid someone can be. I have a better understanding now how stupid people can be.
That's
been a great lesson for me.
What was said when Nicolle ultimately came that night? Imogen came back that night. Like, did you sort of say to them, like, you guys are stupid? Like, I knew this was going to happen, and look what's happened, and here we are. Did they say anything to you? Kind of what was said before that final tribal when you got a chance to finally speak to Imogen and Nicolle again?
No, look, I don't actually remember having a great conversation because, of course, it was another 2 days before I think Nicolle got out, and then Imogen got out, and so it was a few days had gone past. I don't particularly remember having much of a conversation with them about it. I think that they from what I understand from behind the scenes, they fairly quickly realised it was a mistake. But I think that they didn't realise it was, like, when I say fairly quickly, when Nicolle went, they realised it was a bit of a mistake. So it wasn't until there were actually consequences of their actions before they started to realise that they'd made a mistake. And certainly, ultimately, I have the impression that they didn't. I do recollect being at a party at David Mason's place sometime after the show had finished, and Imogen, suggesting to me that they had made a mistake.
And is it true? Now, I had a conversation with Imogen Bailey last year during the Australian Survivor Hall of Fame, and she mentioned about getting a letter from you that she might still have, or an email. Is it true that you did that? Send that to her? And do you remember what you said to Imogen in that letter or email, whatever it was?
No, I've probably still got it. I'm sure I had some contact with Imogen once or twice after the show, but I don't recollect saying anything untoward. Is there a suggestion?
I don't think it was that. I think it was more of she still got it, and it was sort of a conversation about the game. I don't think it was ever implied that it was anything untoward.
I had some contact with her, but I've never said anything untoward to her. No.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I could be wrong, but I'm not sure. It might have involved, obviously, that your disappointment of them. That you had loyalty with them, and that they had obviously turned on you.
I'd be happy to be corrected or to see something that I wrote along that line, but I don't recollect ever having that kind of conversation or writing anything like that to them. No.
Suggestion
that I wrote something like that.
No, I don't think it was ever sort of implied anything else that way. But
I thought I just had a couple of friendly communications with her. I don't remember. I've certainly never had a go at her. No.
Oh no, I don't think that was ever. Yeah, no, I think it was more just. Well, I guess what we're getting at is that you did end up having a love for this game, and that that obviously that you were disappointed obviously by the way you got voted out, and maybe it was just something to do with that. But it definitely wasn't that you were bitter or anything like that.
At the end of the day, I mean, it can be construed that I simply made a mistake. I mean, I was voted out as a consequence of my own error. I mean, that's what really happened. It was stupid on their behalf to do it, but it was also a mistake and foolish from my point of view for it to have happened, because, I should have been playing better at that point. But it was, my desire to believe that people, to a degree, at least to a degree, can be trusted by their word. When a person tells me they're going to do something, it doesn't carry the same weight for me now as it did back then. But it's carried a level of weight for me back then. But what carried the most weight for me was that it was foolish to do anything other than what they said they'd do. And so, in terms of the way Survivor is played, I made a mistake of not realising they could be that silly, but also not realising that they would completely break their word. And
look at that, Matt. You can admit that when you play crap in Survivor, you play crap. So, it's obviously been 15 years for David. It's been a little bit less for you. So one day, Matt, you'll be able to admit you played crap on Survivor. So there you go.
I'll wait till at least 15 years until I admit that.
Certainly I was engaged as being party to my own execution by virtue of not seeing that coming. I just did not see it coming. And there was nothing that Guy could say to me that would have really convinced me of it, because of my fundamental belief that no one could really be that stupid. I mean, seriously, that's what it came to. You could not possibly be that stupid. So that was my undoing. My undoing was never actually being able to foresee that anyone could be so stupid as to do what they did. And gee, they proved me wrong.
Well, by you making that mistake, it did allow you to reunite with Elton back at the hotel. And we saw throughout the season when you guys were, on the chopping block at times that you talked about, when you get to the hotel, you'd enjoy a couple of beers together, maybe some steaks. That time that you were in the jury and back at the hotel, did you end up getting to enjoy a few beers with Elton?
Yeah, I saw a bit of Elton, and Elton paid me. He paid me one of the greatest compliments that I think I've ever had in my life. He probably wouldn't remember it because it wouldn't be a big deal, particularly to him. But he told me, and I was kind of gobsmacked when he said this because I just didn't picture it. Because contrary to what a lot of people think, I really don't have this massive view of myself. And Elton said to me, I learn more from you than I've ever learned from any other person in my life.
Wow. Wow.
And I was like, shit, what did I teach you? I mean, I don't know, but whatever it were, obviously by observing whatever it was that he thought he observed during the course of us being on Survivor, he thought he learned a lot of stuff from me.
Wow.
And I was really taken by that. I was really, really taken by that. It was one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me. And obviously it doesn't seem like perhaps a huge thing, but given all of the things I've been engaged with during the course of my life, but it stuck with me all my life. I just thought it was one of the nicest things anyone's ever said, because it was
hearing stories like that.
So genuine. It was so genuine. And it was also something that took me by surprise, because I'm still not sure what it was that I showed him, but whatever it was something that was natural, because I didn't have sit down. We didn't have lesson time with David. I didn't sit down with Elton and say, "Well, we're going to do this." It wasn't like I was trying to teach him anything. Whatever it was that he learned, that he put so much stock in, he just picked up naturally by watching me being me. And so, for me, it was an enormous compliment.
While we're talking about it, Elton, have you ever met someone that loves steak so much? Because that's all he wanted to talk about out there was his steak. You had to talk him into how, when you guys won those steaks for the challenge, he wanted to just slap it on, and you were like, no, we're gonna stew this and do it in the béarnaise sauce with the zesty salad. And he wasn't convinced at the start. He was like, I don't know, I just want to put it on the grill and start eating it.
Yeah. Look, I can see how he felt about it. It was because Elton really, he was a steak and sort of three veggies. He's beef and vegetable sort of person. And probably the vegetables would be potato, potato, and potato.
Yeah,
he was like that. He was, Elton was sort of, he was gorilla, He-Man. He was very much like that, and he was very well built, and once again very fit and very fast, and quite young. I mean, Elton was only about 26, I think, at the time. So yeah, he wanted his meat. And look, we were somewhat deprived of food, as you are on Survivor. And someone like Elton was probably very much going without. He was probably muscle wasting at that stage.
Well, you loved your protein. I forgot the protein count, but we counted there in one episode. I think you said the word protein about 20 times or something ridiculous like that. So do you still keep up with your protein love 15 years later?
I have a quite extraordinary diet in that, in the first instance, I have a completely supplement-free life. And in fact, I'm engaged in writing about living supplement-free. And when I say that, it probably doesn't seem like very much, but when you think about it, most people take something. They either take omega-3 capsules, or they take the odd vitamin C capsule, or I know a lot of people who virtually live on vitamin B supplements, and people are sort of taking down spirulina and all sorts of stuff. In the circles I move in, it's hard to find people who aren't taking something. I don't take anything at all. I get absolutely everything I need through food. So I have a completely clean, nutrition-only through food diet. So yes, I am very engaged in consideration of protein and calcium and vitamin D and absolutely everything.
I love that. I love the fact that we got you to say the word protein on the show. That was the sole purpose of that question. I mean, just on the food aspect though, David, I mean, you obviously go on to be on Hell's Kitchen. So I'm guessing cooking is something that you really enjoy. You were the chef out there, the master chef. We said it out there. I mean, how much did you enjoy being able to play with the island food that you got there? You were making your mango breakfast out there, your famous breakfast calls and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you look like you were living it up there in Vanuatu, being able to cook all this food.
Island porridge.
Yes.
Hermit crab risotto. Yes. It's a bit chewy, but crunchy. It was certainly crunchy. Yeah, look, that was part of, playing the role. That was part of, I do actually like cooking. I've always liked cooking since I was a very small child. But it was part of playing the role. It was part of being useful. And I think there were several times during the show where it was considered that I was some use because I could cook. So there was certainly once or twice where I was kind of kept around because I wasn't seen as too much of a threat and I could cook. So that was really me just finding a place in the overall scheme of things where I was of use, non-threatening, and therefore not someone you had to sort of just quickly get rid of.
Can we just really quickly on that? I'd be a terrible host if I didn't ask you to do this. Can we get you to give us a breakfast, like in good old David Oldfield style?
Breakfast!
Oh, look at that, Matt. We've achieved some things on this show, and that's up there. There it is.
Oh, here comes Elton. Huh? I know.
I'm porridge.
I'm sorry, I should have said steak.
Did Justin Melby ever admit to breaking that pot?
No.
What was he doing in your kitchen?
I'm not sure Justin's ever admitted to anything.
Yeah, he doesn't even admit he was on Days of Our Lives and Home and Away now. But yeah, that was hilarious, that episode. And because even Justin's confessional, he's like, "Did I break the pot? Well, I've been known to be clumsy." And it's like, did you or didn't you?
Yeah, I was actually quite upset about it.
You were.
It wasn't sort of something we could run down to the shop and replace.
Yeah.
We started out with very little and we gathered a few things and then, but how silly were they to give us, earthenware pots anyway?
Well, the funny thing was, we've never seen it. You guys had a full-on kitchen. I know you won it in a reward challenge, but how good's that? We thought by the end of the season you're going to basically have this whole mansion of a house built. Maybe we often laughed at Kim Johnson. She left too early. Like if she would have known by the end of it you're going to have a whole kitchen out there, she probably would have stayed.
Yes, well, it became relatively, I wouldn't say it became, I was never concerned by the discomfort of it at all. It was a bit rough when it rained. There was one period there where it rained and rained and rained and rained. And I was sleeping with my feet in a basket to try and keep my feet dry. And we were just laying on wet sand. And how we didn't all get sick is really beyond. But excuse me, there was another part I must tell you about. Scooting away from your particular questions, but there was one particular part that I'm sorry never went to air, but I understand entirely why it didn't go to air. And that was where, as you'd appreciate, the producers, they loved images of Imogen throwing up and images of, Nicolle looking like what we now know of as The Walking Dead, one of my favourite TV shows, sort of stumbling along, sort of dragging a piece of wood for the fire or something. They loved these images of, survival where people are just collapsing. And they were talking to me there on, the one-on-one sort of things with the producers. And at one point they said to me, "So, how are you finding it? It's pretty hard, it's cold, it's raining, there's not much food. How are you feeling about it all?" And I said, "Well, look, it's kind of tough, but, my father was shot down and captured by the Japanese and on a starvation diet and weighed lost half of his body weight and was beaten and tortured and threatened with death every day. His best friend was beheaded." I always put everything in perspective. And when I think about that, it's not so bad here. I know that if we get hurt, someone's going to come and give us medical attention. And I know we're not actually going to starve. No one's trying to kill us. And there's a point where it ends and we go home. So I'm not really finding it all that hard. Now, of course, none of that went to air because it was completely opposite to what they wanted to hear. And as I was saying it, it never occurred to me that it wouldn't go to air because to me it was a good story and it was the truth. That was how I felt. I always put everything in perspective. Everything for me is a matter of perspective. No, what's happening to you? I love that old adage, the biblical adage of, I was so sad, words to the effect of, I was so sad that I didn't have shoes until I saw a man who didn't have feet. And everything to me is that kind of perspective. So no matter what's going wrong for you, there's somebody who's got something a whole lot worse happening. And so often I feel quite pathetic if I ever feel sorry for myself. I think, I really shouldn't feel sorry for myself. So I was sorry that story never went to air, because it was a good story and it was true, but it didn't suit what they were looking for.
Well, you'd be happy to know, David, I can guarantee you that it might be 15 years later, but the story will finally make it to air. We'll keep it in the final cut. Don't worry.
Yes. Now our producers don't sort of cut that out. A couple of quick things that I want, because you're our first jury member. So there's one question that I want to sort of ask in terms of the what if scenario that we'll get to, which we did a lot last season and we'll do for this season as well. But the reward that you had with Gab and Imogen, that we obviously shared our little thug life moment. Looking good to me, girls. Share the soap. Now, we raised the question on that episode. You had a good time in front of the mirror. You enjoyed yourself, checking yourself out there in the mirror. What was it about the mirror that was so good to you, David? The shower, everything. Was it a case of a bit of alone time with yourself there was what you needed? I mean, what went down in that bathroom in that nice little villa?
Well, they say love the one you're with.
Yeah.
Now, the reality of it was that the mirror was very dimly lit. And I'm a bit of a pedant in certain aspects. And, I have designed all of our homes for the last the last 4 or 5 homes we've had. I've always designed the interiors. And one of the particular specifications, I'm going to seem like a pedant here, but one of the particular specifications that I have is where the lights are above mirrors, merely for the capacity of shaving closely and accurately and this sort of stuff. And, sadly, like most places, the mirror, the light was sort of like here, but the mirror was here. And, to really actually see yourself in a mirror, the mirror's got to be the light's got to be directly over the mirror. It can't be behind where your face is like this. Well, that was scary. Look at that. So it was more a matter of, I was trying to get up really close. I can't really quite see this bloody mirror. It's freaking light, It was more a matter of that. And I did shave about 3 times. I hadn't shaven for about 2 weeks at that stage. And I probably shaved it. And I think we only had like Bic disposable razors. And they're not great to use at the best of times. So it was really just the fact that I'm a pedant, and I was trying to really get a really good shave. I shaved about 3 times. So it seemed to take a very, very long time, because it did take a long time, because I couldn't see very well. And because I was, really trying so hard with this Bic disposable razor to, get a good shave.
Well, because Matt was a bit questioning there. You mentioned about loving the one you're with. We were thinking maybe that, been a couple of weeks away from the wife at that point. You're in the bathroom by yourself, no cameras around.
It's never been a rule. Masturbation has never been a priority for me. So
right, okay, there, Matt, you've had it quashed. There it is.
Like I said to you earlier about being a participator, not a spectator. Masturbation like being a spectator sport, So,
when you've got
not really involved,
When you've got Gabby and Imogen, 2 models, both saying that you spent more time in there than they did put together, you had to start asking the question, well, what was he doing there? Who knows?
Well, the fact is that, what they needed to shave was a much smaller area than me.
What I did love, David, though, is when we did that Thug Life video, you did send me a message and saying it's like one of the most liked things you've ever put up on social media. Are we glad that you got a bit of a laugh out of it?
I've got many. It's one of the more viewed vids of mine on Instagram in the last couple of months. Yeah, absolutely.
It was just such a funny moment, because we've had a lot of fun with Dicko Thug Life this season, and Matt sort of was like, no, this is the Thug Life moment, because it's the manner in which, it's got nothing to do with the way you say it. It's just almost like you say it, and then you've got this little moment where you kind of lick your lips, and it's kind of obviously completely unintentional. I don't know, maybe it was intentional, but it's just looking good to me, girls. How's the soap?
Yeah, well, and of course the impression is that I can see them. And my recollection is they were wearing bikinis.
They were.
Because they're being filmed and all that sort of stuff. So when I wasn't seeing anything I hadn't seen 100 times on the beach during the course of the filming and all that sort of stuff. So, Yeah, and it was
Yeah.
like, oh wow, you look at that, this pleasure
Imagine
machine.
if Twitter existed back then. That would have been interesting. The other one, I think I asked you this briefly once in a message once about your cap, because this, like, in American Survivor, you've got a lot of famous contestants who are kind of defined by their baseball cap. Boston Rob with the Red Sox. You've got T-Bird with the Atlanta Braves, and you had, I believe it's a St. Louis Cardinals hat that you wore throughout this season. I mean, was that just hey, we need to bring a hat out to Vanuatu, let's grab one? Was this a lucky hat? I mean, kind of what was the story behind wearing the Cardinals hat for that season?
Yeah, look, I hope it's not too sad to say this. There wasn't a particular story. I think it was just, one of the, I wasn't a person who actually ever really usually wore a hat. I do actually wear a hat all the time now because I'm so cognizant of skin cancer, and I've had so many skin cancers, and I've had 22 stitches down here from one they cut out in my nose. And so I'm really, but all of that has happened since. Up until the point where I was going on Survivor, I wasn't a person who ever wore a hat, never wore a hat anywhere, never used sunblock, never wore a hat, was never a person ever to be concerned about any of these things. God, when I grew up, we used to lather ourselves with coconut oil to get brown.
Yeah.
So I just sort of, I needed a hat. Okay, I'm going to need a hat because I'm going to be out all the time. I really actually do have to have some protection because there's no getting away from it. So I think it was just pretty much a hat that we had laying around. There was no great, and it was a new hat, I think, at the time. So started with, I've still got it. It's with all the Survivor stuff somewhere.
One question we probably should have asked at the start of this interview: what was your luxury item?
Oh, well, and this is odd then in the sense of what I'd said about living supplement free. My luxury item was vitamin tablets.
Oh, wow.
So I actually had a huge mixture of vitamin tablets. I don't know, they helped particularly. But yeah, that's.
Were there protein ones?
No protein, sadly. No, but mostly vitamin Bs, vitamin E's, and vitamin C. Vitamin B, vitamin C, vitamin E were the primary ones that I had.
That's interesting, actually, because in Australian Survivor now, you actually get given a vitamin tablet every day.
Do you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of your.
So you got given one then, Matt. You got given one tablet. Yeah,
that's right. I wasn't on my season very long, David. But
you voted out first. Were you the Kim Johnson?
I was the Kim Johnson.
Oh yeah, but he was the Kim Johnson.
But I did not vote for myself, David. So that's all right.
Okay.
Which, as I mentioned, you're our first jury member on the show, and we always like the what if scenarios, and kind of, we talk about in the episodes, had this been a final two, who would you voted for? So given you're our first, I've got a couple here to put towards you here of who you would have voted for if things would have changed. Now, a couple here I'm assuming wouldn't change. If it was a Guy versus Imogen final two, are you still voting for Guy in that scenario?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. If it's Justin and Imogen, who are you voting for?
Probably Justin.
Okay. Nicolle versus Guy, is that still Guy?
Absolutely, yeah. Would have always.
So Guy's at the end. Guy's getting your vote. Okay. Nicolle versus Justin.
Probably Justin.
Okay. Well, here's the kicker then. Nicolle or Imogen?
Ooh. Probably Imogen.
Interesting. Okay. The other one that I'd love to find out, and I mean, you obviously expect you to answer yourself here. I don't know if all things had gone how this season, I guess, should have gone. No dumb twist. Two best players at the end, you and Imogen. Do you think you get the votes at the end?
I think I probably could have convinced the jury. Yeah. It's difficult. It's difficult to say. I'm confident I would have had Guy's vote. I'm confident I would have had Elton's vote. Beyond that, it's hard to say. I think Justin has. It's hard to say. Justin probably wouldn't have voted for Imogen. I think I probably could have made it on Justin and Guy and Elton to start with. But I think I could have also made a fairly compelling case, depending on what those final challenges were. I think my own work to get to the end, I could have made a fairly compelling case. I think I would have been able to better articulate things generally from a sales presentation point of view than perhaps Imogen may have been. By the same token, maybe there'd have been a bit of a sympathy vote, and Imogen's sort of like a girl and she's the underdog, and hey, this is a chance for us to have a female winner of Survivor. And so, I may have been up against that to a degree, perhaps more so now than in 2006. But I'd say it'd have been better than a 50-50 chance. Better than a 50-50 chance if that had been the end. But I never
would have loved to see it.
Sorry?
I was going to say, I would have loved to see it, because having a politician at the final tribal council selling themselves, I mean, that's kind of your job. So, I mean, I think it kind of would have worked out very well to see what your opening speech would have been to the jury.
I mean, I reasonably think I would have had a bit to sell. I mean, I think I could have sold the idea that I'd been consistent, all the way through, and that I hadn't been carried particularly, and that I'd won individual challenges that were both intellectually and physically based. And, so I think I could have done a blow-by-blow description of why I was the most worthy candidate, having gotten to the end. Now, as I say all of that, I never expected to get to that point. I actually expected that mathematically the most likely outcome was us getting rid of Guy, getting rid of Justin, and then Imogen and Nicolle getting rid of me. That's what I really expected. I only actually expected to run third. And I was quite genuine when I explained that to the girls before Justin and Guy came back. I actually expected that mathematically the most likely scenario was for them to be the final two, and I would have been out as number 3.
In hindsight, though, watching that final challenge, the sort of the balancing one, I mean, you would have probably been quite good at that, sort of based on sort of your physical abilities and everything. And obviously, Imogen didn't win that last challenge, hence why she goes out third. So, I mean, how do you think you would have gone on a challenge like that up against Imogen and Nicolle?
Well, I had a bit of a bad back. Hard to tell, really. But the other thing that we can't be certain of is, once again, the way these things change. If I'd still been in the game and it hadn't been who was there, we can't be certain that would have been the final challenge.
True. Very true. Yeah, that's a good point.
Because these things obviously, even back then, there was a level of, I think, manipulation based on the outcomes they'd like to see and who had the strengths and weaknesses. So, we can't be certain that would have been the final challenge.
Did you keep any memorabilia from the show, David?
Yeah, as I've got probably a Kukula and a Mosso
buff. Yeah, we call them buffs. Yeah,
and excuse me, I've got obviously still got the cards hat and all that, and I've still got the Daisy Dukes sort of shirt, the sort of blue. I think it was a Gap shirt actually. I've still got that, but they're all sort of packed away somewhere. All of that stuff's packed away, and I do have the tribal letters, the tree letters and all that sort of stuff.
Matt's favourite, the tree mails.
Yeah,
he always loves to read on them. Yeah,
got those sorts of things, but I mean, I didn't keep a huge amount of stuff. I just kept what was easy for me to grab and keep a hold of.
Well, one thing
not like the Akuba and the great boots that I got from I'm a Celebrity Get Me Out of Here.
Kept all those. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You obviously mentioned that TV is not something you watch, so I'm not sort of sure how much of the Channel 10 version you watch. But they did an All-Star season about a year or so ago, and obviously only kept it to Channel 10 players. They didn't consider your season or the original Channel 9 season. Now, if Matt and I were producers, Matt and I were people involved in casting, to us, any All-Star season of Australian Survivor would automatically include you. It wouldn't be a question. You, Imogen and Guy would be on a list straight away of people that you would put in consideration. And I would argue I would put you ahead of Guy. Not anything against Guy. It's more about what you would bring to the show over Guy. Two-part question. A, what do you think of the fact that Channel 10 ignored your season and didn't consider you? And B, did they ever consider you? Because we know Guy Leach has been called by Channel 10. Whether or not that was for a Champions vs Contenders or All-Stars, we're not too sure. But I guess both sides of the spectrum there. What do you think? And maybe were you called or considered? Because you've obviously done I'm a Celebrity Get Me Out of Here, so you're on kind of Channel 10's books in some way.
No, I haven't been called by Channel 10 for anything like that. So no, they didn't contact me. Look, I understand the way these things work, and Channel 10 are obviously wanting to promote Channel 10, so they don't want to promote. And that's generally how things are from a cross-channel point of view. There is a tendency not to want to use somebody who's been on another channel until it becomes absolutely necessary because you don't have any other choices. So it makes sense that they would make the All-Stars their All-Stars rather than someone from somewhere else. And like I've seen this in other reality shows where you can be on a reality show and the channel, even if the show is being produced by an exterior production company, the channel executives are pushing the production company to, for as long as possible, keep the identities from that channel still in the program. So if you were, without pointing any fingers, if you were a presenter of some show on Channel Z and Channel Z had a reality show that you were also in the reality show whilst being a cast member for a show on that station, that station would be pressuring the production company making the show to keep you in, and someone who wasn't a regular on your station to get rid of them first, because you're always looking for the cross-promotional aspects. So I suppose I'm looking at it from a very pragmatic point of view in answering your question, that it makes sense that Channel 10 would do that. From the audience's point of view, it doesn't make sense because you want the very best people that represent what you're trying to portray, which is an all-stars.
Yeah.
So from the audience point of view, it's not a great idea. From the channel's point of view, it's completely pragmatic.
And that's our argument because, I mean, we know we're in the very slim minority that is even talking about your season or the Channel 9 season. We know that Australian Survivor fans like to black those out, unfortunately, which is very unfortunate because...
Why is that?
I think it just comes down to many levels. The Channel 9 season at the time was not well received. The issues around the music, the editing, the fact it was filmed in Australia, there's so many issues about it that people wanted to black it out. They didn't, at the time, that was when US Survivor was at its absolute peak. It was the biggest show in the world, so they were expecting that version. It didn't come across, therefore it didn't happen. With your season, a lot of factors came down to, I mean, the twist is regarded as just ruining your season. People often don't class it as real Survivor because it was celebrities, you played half the time, all the elements to that. But that's where Matt and I are here sort of defending it, saying, well, no, that's not fair because you played that game like any other Survivor player would play the game. You played the game incredibly, incredibly well. And the way I look at it is that you would be put on a modern day season of Survivor and you would fare very, very well as well. I think just kind of the way you adapted and played would work very well. So kind of what you're saying, if it was done by the fans or, people who kind of want a true all-stars, you would sort of include your season in that conversation. So if that ever comes about, if one day Channel 10 wake up and go, hey, Australian Survivor Archives are right, we're going to all of a sudden remember that Whalers Way 2002 and Celebrity Survivor exists, and they gave you a phone call, would you do it again?
Well, it'd depend on a number of things. It'd depend on where it was, how long it was going to go for, and what circumstances my children were in at the time. Probably that's a little bit out of order. The circumstances my children are in at the time, where it is, when it was going to be, and how much they were going to pay, quite frankly. It would come down to all of those factors. I haven't been in a position for quite some time to accept anything because I'm so tied up as appropriately I should be with my children, because we are going through a very, very difficult separation process, and so my primary focus and my 100% job is being a single dad, and I'm one of those very rare things where I'm a single dad who the kids live with. So it really is a full-on job, especially these days with homeschooling. Goodness gracious, I'm a school teacher now as well. My boys, as wonderful and as smart and as bloody amazing as they are, they're not what I class as self-starters. So they're really any chance to slack off, do something.
We should be calling you Mr. Oldfield in this entire episode. We need to add that to the list of names that you get called.
We did that. We actually did that in some sense. When I was first homeschooling little Teddy last year, which was for a completely different reason. It wasn't to do with COVID, but I had to homeschool him for reasons for about 4 or 5 weeks. and I was trying to keep him in the absolute routine of school. So he was actually, between 9 and 3, he would call me Mr. Oldfield. Not Dad. He wasn't allowed to call me Dad. He had to call me Mr. Oldfield. And I would dress him. It was so funny. His brother was still going to school. So I'd get them both up in the morning, get them showered and breakfasted and dressed and everything, dress them all in their school uniforms, pack their lunches and their bags, take them both to the car, drop Henry off at school, and then bring Teddy back and start school at home. And then he would have play lunch and have his lunch out of his school bag, and we'd go outside to do sport. It was really quite funny. So I kept the entire 9 to 3 routine on the different uniforms for different days. It was quite funny. So all of that would depend really on the children. How
So
old.
the stars aligned, though. All the stars aligned. All of that fit in. You would easily do it again.
Oh, yes, I think so, yes. I mean, I have no particular hesitation beyond responsibilities. It's only my responsibilities that would cause me to hesitate anyway. Otherwise, I would do it. Especially if it was a veterans version. It was everybody over 60. I think I'd probably fare better in a everyone over 60s challenge.
Well, I mean, Shane Gould did win Matt's season. So you've got an Olympic champion who won Survivor. So
I think Shane Gould is probably still fitter now than I have been at any time in my life. So, I mean, what a remarkable Australian, Shane Gould.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, she was 62 when she won my season. Yeah.
And it's a terrible thing that probably not enough young Australians know Shane Gould.
Mm.
Well, they know, I think, are now more so for Survivor, which is, I mean, I don't want to say it's a sad thing to disrespect Survivor fans in the game of Survivor, but this is a person that, people should know far more for her achievements, what she did in 72 Olympics and everything else outside of Survivor, because, she is an incredible Australian, kind of everything she achieved. So, which, I mean, I just love the fact that I can say that Matt, like, I give him shit all the time because he sucked at Survivor, let's be honest, but, like, Shane Gould won his season of Survivor. So, I mean, David, you're on a season that Guy Leach, one of Australia's greatest all-around athletes. I think that's what you called him. And then you've got Shane Gould winning Matt's season. So it's all these levels there of the greatness of the people who win. The two people on this episode besides me, the loser in his bedroom currently podcasting on a Friday night. So I'll just shut up now.
I could be watching The Walking Dead, but I'm here.
Matt wanted to watch the Rabbitohs. Matt's like, I could be watching the Rabbitohs right now.
Yeah. No, I mean, I still marvel about Guy. I mean, Guy really is just, even as still today, Guy is clearly in such remarkable shape. And, he's a person who's stood that time of discipline of being in great shape his whole life. And I think most of it these days is kayaking, and he does a lot of that sort of thing. But, he's always been a great admirer of the physical capability of Guy, especially from I admire people who, I don't ever admire people who do shit that I can do myself. I don't think much of that. But, it's people who do stuff that I can't do that I really admire. And Guy's capacity for longevity in an event, these Ironman events with the kilometres of swimming and kilometres of, so many different things, the capacity for their resilience and having to keep going. I mean, it's just, I can't speak too highly about how much I admire that, because I really don't think I could do that. I mean, I might be able to train myself to do it, but as I say, the people I admire most are the people who do stuff that I can't do.
It seems like, David, anything you sort of put your mind to that you seem to achieve. But do you remember what the response was? Like, once the season was over, it was aired on TV. Do you remember, like, from family, friends, in the media, what the response was? And as a result of you being on Celebrity Survivor, did anything come of that afterwards? Because obviously we know you went on to be on other shows, but do you recall at the time, like, did that open up more opportunities for you?
The funny thing was, there was a couple of funny things that have come from it. One funny thing was that another member of Parliament was quite quizzical with me about it, because he obviously pictured himself as maybe doing something like this. And I mean, the crazy thing was that he was a person who would have never been asked to do anything like this, because most people, as I say, the fame, if I put it that way, or the notoriety that I had was actually not from being a member of Parliament, but from actually being a political advisor and and a spin doctor. That's where it really began, and it was bigger in those days than it was when I was a member of parliament when I did Survivor. And for most part, members of parliament are not really very publicly known at all. And this particular person, would hardly have been known by anybody, despite the fact that he had a relatively important position. And he's quizzing me about this, obviously thinking about doing it himself. And I felt like saying, what makes you think anyone's going to ask you? I mean, seriously. But so there was that. The other thing which will always stand in my mind is quite a long time afterwards when I was looking to get my eldest son into school. And there was a particular school we wanted him to go to. And it was, you had to go and have an interview to get him into the school. And my wife at the time, and I thought it was a bit touch and go until as we were leaving, the person who had been interviewing us, who was the junior school headmaster, said to me, and I have to say, David, I remember to this day, and I loved you on Survivor.
It's brilliant.
And as soon as we got out the door, I went, we're in. He's going to this school. And sure enough, he did. And that always stuck with me. So if Survivor did nothing else for me post, what it did do was it probably helped get my eldest son into the school we wanted to get him into.
Well, I'm telling you now, look at that, Matt. See, people remember David from Survivor, and David's had a much bigger career than you. People I talk to can't even remember who the hell you are. So, I mean, God, no hope for your daughters getting into school one day. Just saying.
I'll be sure to use that, though, when my girls get older and I'm trying to get into school, and if I'm thinking it's touch and go, I'm like, do you watch Survivor at all?
Survivor?
And they're like, I'm going to try that one, David. But so after Survivor, though, you tell us about what other shows were you on?
Look, it was quite a long time between drinks. I went into radio pretty much as soon as after Survivor, I retired from Parliament about not quite a year afterwards. And I fairly quickly went into doing radio, and I had just a summer show. And from that developed into a full-time job. And so I spent 5 years with my own radio show. And that was, very much the love of my life in that sense too. I love to talk back news, talk back format radio. So I did that for about 5 years.
Just butting in quickly, I did actually read something, I don't know, it was on Wikipedia or an article that at one stage you were like the highest rating talkback show host or something, or your show was.
Yeah, I certainly, in my time slot, I broke all the records.
Yeah.
All of that. And in fact, even when I finished in radio, I was the highest rating person on my station Monday to Friday.
Wow.
By a factor of 2 to 1. And so I went out, with good ratings as well when I.
What's that like having listeners, David? That must be nice. I don't know. We don't know what that's like on this show. So
talkback is a wonderful format because it's all live. So, the most important thing is the capacity to be able to talk for a long time. Yeah. And you've got 3-hour programs, or one of the programs I did was 5 hours, but predominantly they were 3-hour programs, 3-hour time slots. And so you've got 3 hours of a lot of people tuned in to what you're saying. And so it was better than politics because, if I had something I wanted to get across, I'm dropping my G's now. If I had something that I wanted to get across, and there was a particular view that I was very strong about because I am quite passionate about various aspects. And if there was something I was really passionate about and I wanted to get it across, I could get on there and I could storm and carry on, like shock jocks, they would call us. I never saw myself as a shock jock, but I would be able to do that. And the next thing, there'd be people on the phone and they want to argue with you or agree with you or whatever it might be. It was fantastic in that sense because it was so immediate. The response, the capacity to say things, and the response was immediate, and there was engagement. And it was a great thing. So, I had 5 years of that. And, then, sadly, I found myself in a situation where I was unhappy with different things happening in my life. I was unhappy with things that were happening at the radio station. My mother was in the last period of her life and did, in fact, die just under 12 months after I left radio. And I had my second son really needed some extra looking after, and so the decision was made for me to leave. There's never really been the opportunities for a whole range of reasons for me to return to any of that, but there has been a couple of opportunities for me to do shows. So the next thing that I did was, I think it was First Contact was the next thing that I did. And, I really didn't want to do that show. They had to actually really talk me into it. I really wasn't all that fussed about doing it because I knew how I was going to be portrayed. But once again, I suppose what a lot of people wouldn't understand is that ideologically, I felt I had to do it because I thought if I don't do it, there's not going to be anybody there who's going to stay true through the whole thing. They're all going to drink the Kool-Aid, and by the time they get to the end, they're going to be hallelujah and high-fiving all of this stuff that is manifested in a very, very unreal sense. So, I really didn't want to do that show, but I did. And then the next thing I think we did was Real Housewives of Sydney, because my ex-wife was involved in that. So she was one of the Real Housewives of Sydney. So they used to call me the seventh housewife. So,
you got your wish all the way back to that boat where you wanted to be a girl. There it was. You got it finally.
There's another name for us, Ben. The seventh.
I wanted to be surrounded by girls. I've never wanted to actually be one. No one would choose. Well, I suppose some people do choose to be girls, don't they? But in fact, the best women I've ever known actually started out as men. I actually get the misogyny from that.
It's all right. We need to get some controversy to get people to listen to this. Keep going. It's all good.
Yeah, so I was the most featured husband. So there I was like the seventh housewife. And then after that came Hell's Kitchen, which I really enjoyed. I wasn't in the show for that long. I think I was third or fourth eliminated. So I was there for, it did actually, I got paid the same, didn't matter. So there was, because at that stage, for various reasons, it was more a matter, well, how much are you paying? But I really did enjoy that because I loved Marco Pierre White, who was the sort of 3-star Michelin chef, an absolute legend in cooking. I mean, this is a guy who Gordon Ramsay was his apprentice. Gordon Ramsay is better known publicly than Marco Pierre White, but picture it, Gordon Ramsay was Marco's apprentice. And he was the youngest ever 3-star, 3 Michelin hat chef in the world. And he was also, we had shared some ancestry and some interest. We both had a great interest in military history. He was from West Yorkshire, and I'm not. I was born in Australia, but my ancestral roots going back 1,000 years, no joke, going back 1,000 years, Yorkshire. And so it was quite funny. We seemed to have quite a bit in common, and we really were very much alike. And I learned an enormous amount in a short period of time. I learned an enormous amount about cooking from Marco. I don't use a lot of it these days because of the simplicity of the way that I eat, but I do cook really quite good meals for other people that I don't eat myself. So that was great. And then the final one was I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. And that was just sort of like, oh, well, the money's good. And
trip to South Africa?
I haven't been to Africa.
Yeah.
So, why not?
Which was look, I don't watch a lot of reality TV outside of Survivor, but generally it's one of these things that if there's a former Survivor contestant on something, I will pay a bit of attention to it. Can't say I watched The Real Housewives, David. Sorry for that. But I did catch a bit of you on Hell's Kitchen, and I do remember a bit of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, because that was a Bernard Tomic season, wasn't it? That kind of all the controversy was around that he had just pulled out of the Aussie Open, and then he was on that, and then didn't he quit on day 1 or 2 of that as well?
I think that was the one, because we weren't there from the start. We were this controversial couple of intruders.
Ah, right.
My wife did it as well. We were the first ever married couple on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and we were the guy, almost the guy, and Justin of that series. But we hadn't been there before, but we were the intruders. So we were never going to be terribly popular. And of course, we were portrayed as controversial and unpopular in the first place and painted as villains. So we were very much, from a production point of view, used in that excuse me, in that sense. So, yeah, it was that show. Yes, you're quite right, when Bernard left.
You were on Celebrity Apprentice as well, weren't you?
No, I didn't do that.
You didn't do a celebrity. Okay.
I wouldn't.
You'd be good at Celebrity Apprentice.
I mean, there are some things you don't want to do. I wouldn't do that. You should. They say you should never say never, but I'm not breaking my neck to do Celebrity, and I'm not breaking my neck to do Dancing Star.
Sorry, it was Dicko that.
Dicko won Celebrity Apprentice.
That's where and then Ben Dark also went on there from okay.
Yeah, no, we had that Survivor, and I haven't seen the new one yet, so don't spoil it how he went. But didn't the Golden God just do the recent reboot of that? So okay,
God.
The other day, so David Jeanette, who spoiler alert, won Australian Survivor All Stars, was on the second Champions vs Contenders. We actually, it's interesting that we have discovered the name David is actually shrouded in greatness in the history of Australian Survivor. There's been 3 of you.
Also in Jewish history.
Well, that makes sense then, doesn't it? You got the Golden God in the Channel 10 era, who is the winner of All Stars and was a memorable player enough to get brought back, obviously, for All Stars. Yourself in the Channel 7 era, who, as we've labelled you, the best player of the season and all the nicknames you have. And then on the original Channel 9 season, we have Matt's favourite, just his absolute idol in that season in David, who sadly didn't win, but he was fourth boot. But
he was a quirky guy. It was David Haas. It was great.
David Haas, just crazily quirky and interesting. So there's only been 3 in the history of Australian Survivor, David, and you've all got your legacies basically of this show.
Well, look, I must, with all those names and things that were bestowed upon me that in many respects I wasn't even aware of until I saw them on your podcast, on your thing on Instagram. I will tell you a story about how I used those, quite interestingly, because I actually used those as a lesson. From the moment I get up in the morning until the moment my boys go to bed at night, I'm trying to teach them something, because I believe that it's every parent's responsibility to make their children better than the parents are. And so I'm always at them with this stuff, always trying to train them and teach them in a whole range of things. And so I actually showed them that, and I got them to evaluate what you'd done on the Instagram thing, so that I could convey the lesson to them that, you should never bestow titles upon yourself, that, what's important is what other people say you are in many respects. You need to believe in yourself, but what stands out for others who are watching is what other people call you, not what you say you are yourself, especially when you're giving yourself a rap, big pat on the back, aren't I so great? I'm so great. Well, it always sounds better when somebody else says it. So I actually used your Instagram post as a lesson for my children in not giving themselves these names, but aspire to other people giving them these names.
Well, I just want to formally apologise then to your children if they don't go on to much. Never is this show meant to be used for educational purposes, David. So, yeah.
It's always a worry. You hope your children go on to, the most important thing for your children is for them to be happy. But often happiness requires them being successful, at least at something along the way. Maybe
not now that you've used us as education. So
I just hope you've taught them, David, that if one of them ever get to play Survivor and they're down to the final 5, don't always consider stupidity. Always consider stupidity.
Don't think stupidity isn't a factor in people's decision making against their own interests.
I hope you're teaching that. But look, in all seriousness, it's funny because these days in Survivor, every second contestant goes out there and they look at the camera and they're like, "I'm the puppet master. I'm pulling the strings." And I mean, that's just everyone trying to say that. Where you literally the whole season were given the title as the puppet master, and Ben and I, we always say you're the original puppet master in Australian Survivor because you were, or you are.
Eminently kind, and let's always remember that people that say these things about themselves, which I was making the point with my boys, are basically wankers.
Well, when we get Luke Toki on the show, Matt, let's write that down. Wanker. Okay.
You were a wanker.
In the words of David Oldfield, Luke, you're a wanker.
It's the sad state of affairs that we live in a world where people want to jump up and down and do their own publicity. I'm great. I'm fantastic. And I just... I'm this, that, and everything else. You know,
See, Channel 10, if you're watching this is why you get David back onto another All-Stars 2. Get Luke back on. You've got a rivalry straight away here. Like, straight away. Boom. That works.
Who is Luke?
Exactly.
Oh,
there's another point.
okay.
You don't even know who he is.
No,
so that works perfectly.
So Luke Toki is probably the biggest name, I would say, in maybe the Golden God. David Jeanette might match him now.
I'd argue Luke.
Luke Toki's basically the face of Australian Survivor. So he's played twice. He's never won. Look, he's a character. He's a great guy.
But a wanker, apparently.
Well, yeah. Look, he isn't. He's actually a great guy, and he is. And they loved him. He's such a fan favorite that although he didn't win, he basically a GoFundMe page got set up. He's got a few young children that are suffering from different issues, and basically he didn't win, but he still got the $500,000. They set up a GoFundMe page, and
I did see something.
yes, and the GoFundMe page hit like $550,000.
He's about to be on Big Brother. He's about to be on.
Can we set up a Help David Oldfield GoFundMe page for paying paying legal costs in a divorce case?
Sure. Let's get it up and running. We'll put aside our hours.
Luke, I'm hopeful you're telling me that Luke plays it up for the cameras, that he doesn't actually think of himself.
Yeah, he plays it up for the camera. Luke's a top bloke. He is. And look, these days, Survivor's different. Like the characters on there, they're trying to play different roles, and he's a larrikin, and he comes up with all these different.
Let's be honest. To point how different Survivor is now, David. I mean, like if you're out there on an island, would you vote this beautiful bald man out like he got voted out first? I mean, come on, look at him. Look at that face. He's got Donald Brammer behind him. You would never vote him out, would you?
Well, I would, depending on the circumstances. I'm sorry, I don't know the circumstances under which how that happened to you.
You probably would have voted me out, David. So it's all right.
There must have been something going this way.
I think even Ben Wynn would have voted out Matt Dyson. Let's be honest.
Now, David, look, you released a book in 2019. Can you hold it up to the camera now? Can you tell us what it's called? Tell us what it's about.
He's going to get it, Matt. He's going to get it. He's got to get the prop.
Now, one here.
Now,
look at that.
Look at that. What a picture. So tell us the title of it.
He's got to have the half face going on there, almost like a Two-Face style thing.
Oh, don't you call me two-faced.
I've lost him. He might be hanging up on us in a minute. So being David, I mean, it's literally self-explanatory. It's just about you, I guess.
Look, the interesting thing is now I look back on it, I'm wondering whether people got the wrong idea about the title, because it might have seemed self-indulgent. And I didn't consider that at the time, that it could be viewed that way. And look, frankly, no one has said that to me. I just tend to always overthink everything later on. And I was wondering whether maybe being David seemed like it was self-indulgent, but it really was. It is a book it explains, or I think it explains, why I think the way I do about certain things. But it's not just really about me. I mean, it's about Pauline Hanson, and it's about Tony Abbott, and it's about politics, and it's about how things actually work in politics, and how people win as opposed to how the public think they win, and the numbers, and how of those sorts of things the factors that come into play that really create the results rather than what the media says. And it's the facts of a whole range of things. It's cover to cover filled with facts that people would never get under any other circumstances, and a whole range of life's experiences, and how I came into being by virtue of the parents that I had. And it's also it's not kind about me. Is the thing. Most people have, I suppose, what we call an autobiography that is nice about themselves. I don't actually say anything nice about myself. For example, on the back cover it says, seen by many as staunchly right-wing and on most political issues, politician turned reality star. Well, that's a bit of a joke. How is anybody possibly a reality star?
Oh, you're a reality star, David. Come on.
We're not.
Am I?
We're reality contestant.
No, Matt, you're not.
David Oldfield is never far from controversy or an attention-grabbing headline. Private secretary to former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, co-founder of the One Nation Party, former member of Parliament, broadcaster, public figure, adventurer, animal lover, father, Do you think you know David Oldfield? Outspoken, controversial, politically incorrect. David Oldfield is highly recognisable, but what's driven him and who is he really?
Ooh.
Love him or hate him? Readers will be fascinated to get to know the real David Oldfield, what he really thinks and what has shaped his views on life, love and country, much of which may surprise. David is deeply personal and honest about himself and others, while clearly self-deprecating and at times uniquely unkind to himself. He tells it how it is without seeking favour or redemption.
I'm hooked.
So
Sign me up.
Was that a comment by Dicko that you just read out?
No. But the point I'm trying to make is it's not a love-in for aren't I a great guy book. You know, it's just full of real things. And I mean, anybody who was to read that would understand, you know, some of the things that I said to you earlier about I don't really think as much of myself as a lot of people seem to think I do. And, you know, I don't know why, but for most of my life, I've faced this scenario where often people who have never met me seem to think they know me better than I know myself. But anyway.
It's interesting, David, because
I'm going to go to my grave misunderstood. There you go.
You know, somehow this slipped through the cracks. So I didn't realise that you'd had released a book until about a week ago. Ben didn't realise until tonight before we started this podcast.
Well, I'm not sure much of the public realised either.
Well, did you advertise it?
Well, I'm going to get to. Your sales just went up by 1 because I ordered it last week, hoping that I would get it before tonight. It hasn't turned up, unfortunately. But I'm not the sort of guy that gets too enthusiastic about reading books. I like reading, but more just, you know, on the internet. I obscure things. I like reading. But when I found out you had a book, I ordered it straight away. I'm actually genuinely excited about being able to read this book because I think you're a very interesting bloke. I think I'll learn a lot about you and what you've done. But you mentioned that you even, and this is something I wasn't aware of until you mentioned it earlier, that you actually touch on a bit of Survivor in there as well.
Oh yeah, there is a section because of the chapter on reality TV. So there's a whole part in there about Survivor. So yeah, there's a bit on all of those shows, and there's a section also on diving, which probably doesn't make a lot of sense, except. And look, you know, I describe myself as a deep thinker. I overthink. I think very deeply about a whole range of things in regards to social interactions and the way people perform certain, you know, acts. I'm being entirely clean here, by the way. But I really am very, very much a deep thinker. And so when you do get the book, you might find it a bit hard getting through the diving aspect of it, but it also might show you some things about the way I think, which is why it's being David, because diving, scuba diving, and, you know, I've been nearly killed many times, some of those times during scuba diving, not all those times, but, you know, diving itself, and I dived from a very young age. Scuba diving taught me so many things about people, about, you know, ego, and, you know, particularly about people just thinking they're so much better than they are in so many aspects, and not being able to admit mistakes or learn from things they did wrong. You know, I think scuba diving probably in many respects taught me more about people than almost anything else that I've ever done. And I hopefully got that across in the book for anyone who was interested enough to read through it, because that's what it was all about.
Did you sell a few copies?
Well, I don't actually know what the sales figures are. I mean, I was approached to write the book, so it's not like a self-publication. It was published by New Holland, and they approached me and asked me to write it. And I never actually really pictured writing a book about myself. And they said, we want you to write a conversational biography. So I did. You know, it's not sort of, I was born here and this is my life and this is what I think. It's not like that. It involves all of the various interesting people, not all of them, but a lot of interesting people I've come into contact with and what I did with them and those sorts of things.
So we just missed out then. We might make it to the sequel.
Well, so you can be the next one. So it's not a love-in. It's not a love-in of David Oldfield. It's not me saying what a great bloke I am. In fact, it's quite the contrary to that. I'm really, you know, very honest about the things that I think are wrong with myself. But, you know, I have another couple of books, you know, that I'm planning. So, you know, I'm mostly engaged now in health. My real thing is health. I only really wrote the book to demonstrate that I could write a book so that I could write the other things that I want to write.
So how did it work? So they basically just pay you a fee to write it, and then it doesn't matter how many copies get sold. That's on them to try to recoup their money. Or do you still get then, depending on how many? So how does it? I have no idea how it all works.
Yeah, you get paid. Well, in my case, yes, I got paid a fee up front. So yes, they pay a fee up front. I still haven't collected it from my agent, funnily enough, but that's me, not them. But they do pay a fee, so it hasn't come into my hands yet, but ultimately it will. Then there is a royalty aspect depending on how many copies are sold. But yes, they approached me, and I was flattered that they wanted me to write about me fundamentally. I'm not sure I actually gave them what they were expecting, but I'm happy with it. There was another one. That I was planning that's sort of related to it. But what I really want to write about is health and longevity, and the capacity to age in a fashion where you're vital and active. We don't have to become cripples, and we don't need Zimmer frames, and you can live with a proper diet. The diet itself in many respects is medicine. I mean, a lot of people just make themselves ill by virtue of what they eat and never get themselves fixed. And, we're so reliant on pharmaceutical companies. We're so reliant on the scenario of being able to get a pill to fix everything. And you don't have to be like that at all. I haven't taken so much as a headache tablet in over 3 years, or taken a vitamin of any kind. And I don't expect that everybody's going to be able to quite turn themselves on to go to the trouble that I do to do it. But it'd be good to get a lot more people headed further down the track of understanding the nutrition that's available in certain aspects of food than the things you can do without, and the fact you can do better on all of that. And I'm sorry, I'm probably sort of wasting your time a bit talking about this, but I have a lot of things in me that I still want to write, including an apocalyptic trilogy that I've been working on. So
I like the sound of that.
Well, the good thing is, David, that for any of the listeners that might be keen to get your book, while they're waiting for you to write this trilogy and the health book as well, that the good thing is it only cost me $14 on Booktopia. So it's a pretty good deal.
It's been out for a couple of years now.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It would be on special well and truly by now.
Yeah, well, I think it's funny. Like most of them, when I Googled it, and it was like $28. And then I found it $14 on Booktopia. I'm like, yes, please.
There's one of those discount bookstores at a shopping centre here. It might be in like the $2 bin by now.
Yeah, I was going to say,
check it out.
$2 bin.
Yeah,
I thought you were going to. Yeah, I was worried that you're going to say I got ripped off. That should have been.
You might find me at Kmart paying people to take them.
Yeah,
it's interesting because Amber Petty just released a book recently. Her first book only a couple of months ago.
What was it called?
It's a love story. I've gone blank.
Yeah.
It's basically a love.
So from Amber, it's fiction then.
Yeah,
it is about a life. It's about a life, I guess, and about.
We're discovering, David, that this is actually a lot of Australian Survivor contestants have released books. In season 1, Sylvan, who was on that season, he's actually well, he was more of a fantasy author, so he's released sort of like fiction. But from your season, Amber, yourself, Wayne Gardner's got an autobiography. Fiona's wrote a lot of sort of witchcraft books. Yep. We're not sure if Guy's probably released a book at some point in his career. And then of the Channel 10 ones, because you've got a lot of pseudo-celebrities on those as well. I mean, Stephen Bradbury was on it. He's got a book. Lydia Lassala, she's got a book. Those sort of athletes are on there. Gavin Wanganeen recently. And then we've got a couple of other contestants there was a contestant who was part of the SAS. He sort of released a book mainly just sort of on survival skills and everything. And
that wasn't Ben Wynn. That
wasn't Ben Wynn. No, it was Mark Wales. So... Yeah,
you certainly wouldn't want swimming lessons from Ben Wynn.
Learn to swim with Ben Wynn.
like the Harold Holt Memorial.
People, it's got the Ford by Harold Holt. People who taught him how to swim.
And unfortunately, David, I haven't released a book yet, so you'll just have to wait a little bit longer. But Amber's book is called "This Is Not a Love Song." That's what it's called.
This is not a love song.
It's a memoir about mental health and love by Amber Petty.
Oh, I'm sad. Sorry, I didn't realise she had mental health issues.
Yeah, I think I don't look. Is this a book that I probably will? I'll read it after yours, probably. But yeah, I think it would be an interesting read. I mean, she's done a fair bit in her life.
I'm actually going to learn to
radio.
read first before I get your book, David.
She seemed a nice girl, Amber.
Amber's great, and we love Amber.
Nice
if you have a spare, hour or so, and you want to listen to any of our past interviews, Amber's definitely
Look, I intend to. I actually intend to. There's a couple of them, and I did start listening to one. And I was really quite enthralled by it. I thought it was a great deal of fun. I said I can't remember exactly which one it was now.
Well, it's clear to us that you didn't listen to anything, otherwise you probably wouldn't.
No. I listened to about an hour. It is very hard to find time when my children are here, and my children are here, 12 nights out of 14. And by the time it gets to the 2 nights when they're not here, it gives me a chance to start doing stuff that we're here. But no, I have looked at it, and there was one that I was listening to that I thought was a great deal of fun, and I was sorry I switched off from it now, and I had intended on going back. And I'd like to hear the David Mason one.
Yeah.
It's a very good chat. Very, very good chat.
The Wayne Gardner one was good. I really enjoyed the
Wayne Gardner one. I listened to the snippets that were on Instagram, and I'd like to listen to that one.
All of them actually been.
Yeah, all of them. Even
not to pump our own tires,
great.
but it's actually very, very interesting. Speaking of someone like Kim Johnson,
extraordinary, and I believe that people all over the world are listening to them and backing up, trying to hear them, even 2 and 3 times.
Well, we are inundated every single week with our thousands of listeners. It's just I can't leave the house without getting paparazzi. It's quite embarrassing, to be honest. But hey, you've got to.
I tell you, if the stars lined up, there is a show that I would like, I think, to do, and that would be the SAS show.
Yes.
Yeah,
Which you have to beg Channel 7 to do that? Like, hey, come on, or do you have to over publicize like they like to do on that network?
I know it's on. Sorry, look, I know it's a crazy question for you. It's on Channel 7, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Right. So, because I don't watch free-to-air TV, so I've seen ads for it when I've been zipping through. It's hilarious. I think that major television stations advertise on web-based.
They were too busy getting Roxy Jenko and Chappelle Corby on.
Don't mention that name anymore, Matt. We've blacklisted that name.
Roxy was on SAS, wasn't she? Well,
I think Roxy's been on everything because that's how she's famous, right? Because she just appears on things, and I still don't know why she's a thing. So,
she won. She did win Apprentice, didn't she?
Oh no, I don't think she won Apprentice.
She never won. No, she never won.
Not anyone that I watched. So,
she's a very intelligent young lady, Roxy.
I think we've overdone our Roxy quota for this show. We can't give it too much publicity. David, two quick things before we let you go. You obviously you've written the book. You're talking about sort of what you're doing with your kids and planning on writing other books. What else are you up to now? Kind of what's the life of David Oldfield like at the moment?
Life is very, very, very much traumatic and on hold for me. We're going through. There's no point BSing about it without going into too much detail. But we're going through a very traumatic family time. And my whole reason for living, quite frankly, is just to make sure that my children get the best that they can out of life. Separations are always most difficult, it would seem, on the children. I'm happy to say that I haven't noticed that in my boys, and I think that that's mostly attributed to the fact that they were always used to being around me predominantly anyway, so their lives didn't really change, and I've kept them in the same activities. They, apart from lockdown, they've still been in rugby, they've still been in karate, they've still been swimming, they still go horse riding. They're living in the same home, going to the same school, having the same activities. Their lives basically haven't changed, and I'm grateful to have been able to achieve that for them. But no, without boring you too much, my life has been on hold for a very long time because my 100% focus is my children's needs, and that's going to be like that for a little while to come yet. Well, it'll be like that until they're much, much older, but the focus that I have to put into that currently will continue at 100% for quite some time to come. So I haven't been freed up to do much else. I am working on a health-related scenario, which I was saying to you earlier. So I'm working on that, but that's been pretty much destroyed by lockdown. So we can't really get together and film. We're mostly just editing by remote, and I'm writing scripts and things. But my life's pretty much on hold. It's all really about being a dad and struggling forward through, a mire of legal matters and anger and hatred.
Well, we'll say the most important job in life often is to look after one's children, right? So
there is
obviously,
no more important job than being a parent. There really
yeah,
is.
for sure.
You're not willing
For sure.
shouldn't become one. And there's a whole chapter on parenthood in the book. So I have very, very strong views on parenthood. We
There you go, Matt. I'll help you out. There you go. That's why you bought the book. Yeah.
Always need to remember that there is no waiting room in the sky filled with children begging to be born. If you're going to bring a child into the world, you have, in many respects, selfishly determined to do that. And once you do that, then you have to be utterly selfless. And, you go from being this selfish person who wanted a child to having to be a selfless person who now has to commit themselves 100% to raising that child and, in my belief, making them better than you are. If you don't do that, you've failed.
Well, I can tell you there's a reason why I'm not a parent. Let's just put it that way. On that page, David.
If you're not willing to do that, then you shouldn't be a parent. So congratulations. You're doing the right thing. No one should be a parent that is willing to be absolutely committed totally. From the moment
I can't even commit to myself right now. So, it's...
You won't be loving the one that you're with then.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, maybe later, but that's another story. The last question I want to ask you, David, on sort of more of a reflective note. I mean, how do you reflect on your time on Australian Survivor? Sort of 15 years later, obviously we've brought back a bunch of memories for you today on this interview. But I mean, how do you reflect on your time on the show?
It remains without question being the most favourite television that I've done. Of all the television that I've done, not just reality TV, but everything. The thing which I most enjoyed doing from the aspect of being filmed in any sense was Survivor. I quite enjoyed Hell's Kitchen. I won't get into what else I enjoyed. Nothing ranks close to Survivor. And as I said previously, if they had said to me, if the day it finished, they said, look, we're going to stay for another month and we're going to start over, I'd said, sign me up. I'd have been ready to go. And probably more so because I had a greater feeling for it by then and a greater understanding of how it was going to work. And I wouldn't have fallen for Imogen and Nicolle. No, loved it. I didn't have a bad experience. I come away with no bad experiences from Survivor. I come away with a great deal of having fun, learning lots and lots and lots of things, and generally enjoying the overall experience. I actually found, once again, the others had difficulty grasping this. I found Survivor quite therapeutic in many respects because, I was used to a 24/7 news cycle. I was used to my bloody mobile phone going off all the time. And when it wasn't ringing, there were text messages and there was always drama and there was horror and there was something going wrong somewhere. And there's somebody who wants to talk to you about something they think you've done, you haven't. And, it was really a very traumatic existence for me around that time. Not as traumatic as it is now, but in a different way back then. And I actually found it quite therapeutic. I was going to bed early. I was getting, frankly, more sleep than I got at home. I was sleeping for 10 hours, and there was nothing actually to worry about. And this is the odd thing. For me, there was nothing to worry about in Survivor. I wasn't traumatized by any of it. I slept really well. Food was a bit short here and there, but it was all part of the game and it was all fun. The competitiveness of it was a bit of fun. Plenty of time outdoors, lots of vitamin D. There was absolutely nothing I can say about the experience that wasn't enjoyable right across the board. And as I say, to me, in many respects, it was therapeutic.
Well, that's what we like to hear. And I can say that with a certain confidence right now that there's nothing about this interview that we didn't enjoy either. It's been so much fun, David, to learn everything about your time on the show and everything else. And as we said at the top of this interview, we were looking forward to this maybe the most. And that's no disrespect to anybody else that we're going to get on the show in the future or sort of we've had on in the past, because we wanted to hear these stories. We wanted to hear it straight from your mouth. We're a big admirer of the way you play the game. And as I've said, I think you were the best player on season 2. You were robbed of not being on All Stars, and just such a pleasure to watch you. So I'll hand it over to Matt to close out the interview. But I just want to say from myself, it's a pleasure chatting to you today, and it's a pleasure to be able to hear all these great stories and hear it straight from your mouth.
I think I've gone bloodshot during I don't know why that's happened, but look, before you tune out and before Matt comes on, if I could just say that thank you to both of you. I mean, because you've been enormously kind in your comments, and I think very indulgent. And I came here tonight with nothing particularly that I was going to say, hopeful that whatever I should say would be covered off by virtue of the questions that you would ask. So I wasn't sort of prepared in any particular sense. So thank you very much for having me. It's been an enjoyable couple of hours, and well and truly worth getting away from The Walking Dead. So I'm
best compliment we've ever received.
I'm very into apocalyptic shows.
Are you a fan of the Fear the Walking Dead as well?
Look,
it's good.
Yeah, no, I do like Fear the Walking Dead. I've been watching the World Beyond, the one that's the latest one where the kids are like, this the new Walking Dead. There's only been one series as well. I can't say that's as good. No, I do like Fear the Walking Dead. I'm not up to date with it.
No, yeah.
And I'm not going to go to the details, but that's all separation and divorce related. There's a lot of things I no longer do.
Okay.
But I'm very much a fan of the genre of post-apocalyptic stuff, and it all comes down to Survivor. It is all Survivor stuff, and I teach my own boys Survivor aspects, camouflage. It's quite hilarious. How to be seen, how not to be seen, as Monty Python would put it. How not to be seen, and. No, I'm into apocalyptic stuff. But you guys have been very indulgent, and you've been great, and I really appreciate what you're doing. I hope that at some stage you have not anything to do with, from my perspective, I think you deserve to have hundreds of thousands of listeners to what you do.
So do we. Help us out there, David.
I really think you do. You deserve a vastly bigger audience. There's no question in my mind where that's concerned, because I genuinely have heard some of what you're doing, and I was greatly entranced by it, and I wanted to hear more and more and more. It's just the circumstances, and it's just ugly. But I've enjoyed being here this evening, and I'm very, very verbose, as you can tell, even by virtue of the fact that I'm rabbiting on now in my long thank you for having me. But it's been a pleasure being here. You've been indulgent, you've been kind. I was trying to explain to my children only this morning, I'm doing Survivor tonight, and these guys have actually ranked me as the number 4 player in the 76, I think it is, players of all of the seasons in Australia. And they're like, but Dad, how do they do that? You didn't even win. I said, I don't know. They've rated me higher than the guy who won the series I was in. I said, it's remarkable. It was one of the greatest, sort of compliments I've been paid. It stands almost next to Elton saying, I've never learned so much from anybody before. Look, thanks.
I'll just finish off, David, by saying, look, I think I've learnt a lot from you just from these last couple of hours listening to you. I'm absolutely can't wait to read your book. You're a gentleman. I think you're a wise man. You've got a lot of opinions, and when you talk, people listen, and I think that says a lot about the type of person you are. I think you're an interesting person, and it's been an absolute pleasure to interview you tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure watching you on Survivor all those years ago, and thanks for coming on the show.
No, thank you again, and I look forward to hearing what you think of the book, because it's probably not what you're expecting, and I mean that's what I like to hear. It's not what I was expecting.